Long before the clash of steel and fire on the frozen fjords, before the first sails of the Viking longships cut through the northern seas, there was a time when the gods themselves walked among men. A time when the world was not yet shaped by the hands of conquerors, but by the whispers of Odin, Thor, and the ancient powers that ruled the cosmos. The foundations of Norse mythology are woven through a rich tapestry of archaeological relics, runic inscriptions, and ancient manuscripts that speak of a world both awe-inspiring and terrifying. These sacred texts and unearthed artifacts, buried in the cold earth for millennia, offer us a glimpse into the souls of a people who saw the world not as we do, but as a place where the gods' fates and their own were entwined. From the Bronze Age to the sagas of the Viking Age, the legacy of Norse religion and cosmology began to take root in the frostbitten lands of Scandinavia. Through the runes carved into stone and bone, the myths passed down through generations, and the sacred sites unearthed by modern archaeology, we uncover the origins of a faith that believed in realms beyond the horizon, in gods who fought and died, and in a world on the edge of the apocalypse. The path to understanding this lost world is not an easy one. But as we peel back the layers of time, we may just find that the gods, like their myths, are not so distant after all. The foundations of Norse mythology rest upon a complex tapestry of archaeological discoveries, linguistic evidence, and medieval manuscripts that collectively illuminate the religious and cosmological beliefs of pre-Christian Scandinavia. Understanding these sources requires careful examination of material culture, runic inscriptions, and literary traditions that span nearly a millennium of cultural development. Archaeological evidence provides the earliest tangible connections to Norse religious practices, with findings dating back to the Bronze Age revealing continuities in Scandinavian spiritual traditions. Excavations at sites across Denmark, Sweden, and Norway have uncovered ritual deposits, ceremonial weapons, and religious artifacts that demonstrate sophisticated theological concepts long before the composition of written sources. The Trindholm Sun Chariot, discovered in Denmark and dating to approximately 1400 BCE, depicts a bronze horse pulling a golden disc representing the sun, establishing early evidence for solar worship that would later manifest in Norse cosmology through figures like Balder and the daily journey of Sol across the sky. Bog deposits throughout Scandinavia have yielded ceremonial weapons, jewelry, and human remains that indicate complex sacrificial practices. The yacht spring boat from ALS, Denmark, dating to around 350 BCE, was discovered alongside weapons and shields deliberately destroyed and deposited in a ritual context. These archaeological patterns suggest that weapon sacrifice, later documented in written sources as offerings to Odin and Tyr, represented continuity from Bronze Age religious practices. The Gundestrup cauldron, though Celtic in origin, was found in Denmark and depicts scenes that parallel later Norse mythological themes, including antlered deities and ritual sacrifices that resonate with descriptions of Odin's shamanic practices. Runic inscriptions constitute the earliest written evidence of Norse religious beliefs, with the oldest examples dating to approximately 150 CE. The Overstabu spearhead from Norway bears one of the earliest runic inscriptions, reading roundage as likely meaning tester or challenger, suggesting the weapon's ritual significance in combat or religious contexts. The Galahus horns from Denmark, dating to the early 5th century, feature runic inscriptions alongside elaborate decorative scenes depicting figures that prefigure later mythological characters. The inscription Ek Hlivigastus Holtihas Horna Tauido identifies the craftsman and demonstrates the integration of runic writing with religious metalwork. Stone inscriptions from the later period provide more explicit religious content. The rock stone in Sweden, dating to approximately 800 CE, contains the longest runic inscription known and references mythological figures including Theodoric the Great, connecting historical and legendary narratives. The stone's complex text weaves together references to Ragnarok, heroic legends, and astronomical observations, demonstrating the sophisticated integration of mythology, history, and natural philosophy in Viking Age thought. Picture stones from Gotland, particularly those at Otter and Tjangvita, depict scenes from Norse mythology including Odin's eight-legged horse Sleipnir, Thor's fishing expedition for the Midgard serpent, and warriors entering Valhalla, providing visual representations of mythological narratives that complement textual sources. The Poetic Edda, preserved primarily in the 13th century Icelandic manuscript, known as the Codex Regius, represents the most comprehensive collection of Norse mythological poetry. This collection of 29 poems, written in Old Norse, preserves oral traditions that likely originated centuries before their written compilation. The manuscript itself, discovered in 1643, contains poems that demonstrate varying ages and origins, with some potentially dating to the 9th or 10th centuries based on linguistic analysis and historical references. Völuspá, the opening poem of the Poetic Edda, provides the most complete account of Norse cosmology from creation to destruction. The poem presents Osiris's vision of the world's beginning, the establishment of the god's realm, the coming of humanity, and the eventual Ragnarok. The text describes the primordial void Ginnungagap, the emergence of the first beings from the interaction of fire and ice, and the creation of the world from the body of the primordial giant Ymir. The poem's structure moves chronologically through mythological time, establishing the fundamental narrative framework that underlies Norse cosmological understanding. Havamal, another crucial poem in the collection, presents Odin's wisdom teachings and includes the account of his self-sacrifice to gain knowledge of the runes. The poem's 164 stanzas combine practical advice with mythological narrative, demonstrating how Norse religious thought integrated ethical instruction with cosmological understanding. The text describes Odin hanging from Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights, pierced by his own spear to gain the wisdom of the runes, establishing the god's role as a sacrificial deity who trades suffering for knowledge. The heroic poems within the Poetic Edda, including the Volsung cycle, preserve legendary narratives that complement the mythological material. These poems, including Atlikvida and Atlamal, recount the stories of Sigurd the Dragonslayer, Brynhildr the Valkyrie, and the tragic fate of the Burgundian kings. While ostensibly historical, these poems integrate mythological elements, including dragons, valkyries, and divine intervention, demonstrating the fluid boundaries between mythology and legendary history and Norse tradition. Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda, composed in Iceland around 1220, represents a systematic attempt to preserve and explain Norse mythology for Christian audiences. Snorri, a prominent Icelandic politician and scholar, recognized that traditional poetic forms required knowledge of mythological references that were becoming obscure as Christianity displaced the old religion. His work consists of 4 main sections: the prologue, Gylfaginning, Skaldskaparmal, and Hadadal, each serving different pedagogical purposes while preserving mythological material. Gylfaginning, the the most mythologically significant section, presents Norse cosmology through a dialogue between the Swedish king Gylfi and three mysterious figures who represent different aspects of Odin. This narrative framework allows Snorri to systematically explain the creation of the world, the genealogies of the gods, and the events leading to Ragnarok. The text provides detailed descriptions of the 9 worlds connected by Yggdrasil, the daily activities of the gods in Asgard, and the complex relationships between different categories of supernatural beings. Skaldskaparmal focuses on the poetic language used in skaldic verse, explaining the mythological origins of various kennings and metaphors. This section preserves numerous myths that explain how particular poetic expressions originated, including the story of how Odin acquired the mead of poetry and the tale of Thor's journey to Utgard. These narratives, while serving pedagogical purposes for aspiring poets, preserve mythological material that might otherwise have been lost. Snorri's approach demonstrates both the strengths and limitations of medieval Christian scholarship applied to pagan material. His systematic organization and clear prose style make Norse mythology accessible to modern readers, but his Christian perspective sometimes leads to interpretations that may not reflect original pagan understanding. His euhemeristic approach, which interprets the gods as deified historical figures, reflects medieval Christian attempts to rationalize pagan beliefs while preserving their cultural significance. The Heimskringla, Snorri's collection of Norwegian king sagas, provides additional insight into Norse religious practices and beliefs through its historical narratives. The sagas describe the religious activities of pre-Christian kings, including sacrificial practices, temple worship, and the gradual conversion to Christianity. The Ynglinga saga, which opens the collection, traces the genealogy of the Swedish and Norwegian royal houses back to the god Freyr, demonstrating how mythological narratives provided legitimacy for medieval political structures. Archaeological evidence from religious sites corroborates and expands upon the textual sources. Gamla Uppsala in Sweden, described by Adam of Bremen in the 11th century, served as a major religious center with a temple dedicated to Thor, Odin, and Freyr. Archaeological excavations have revealed evidence of ritual activities, including animal sacrifices, human burials, and ceremonial feasting that align with descriptions in the written sources. The site's 3 large burial mounds, traditionally associated with legendary Swedish kings, demonstrate the integration of royal power with religious authority that characterizes Norse political theology. The temple at Apakra in southern Sweden has extensive evidence of religious activities spanning several centuries. Excavations have uncovered ritual deposits, miniature weapons, and religious artifacts that demonstrate continuity in religious practices from the Roman Iron Age through the Viking period. The site's ritual buildings, identified through post-hole patterns and artifact distributions, provide physical evidence for the temple structures described in literary sources. Borg in the Lofoten Islands of Norway represents another significant archaeological site that illuminates Norse religious practices. The excavated Chieftain's Hall, dating to the 6th through 8th centuries, contained evidence of ritual feasting, weapon sacrifices, and religious ceremonies that parallel descriptions in the sagas. The hall's impressive size and elaborate construction demonstrate the integration of political and religious authority that characterizes Norse society. Runic inscriptions from a religious context provide additional evidence for Norse mythological beliefs. The Kvinneby amulet from Sweden contains a runic inscription invoking Thor's protection, demonstrating the practical application of mythological knowledge in daily life. The inscription reads, "Thor hallow these runes," establishing the god's role as protector against harmful magic and evil influences. The integration of these diverse sources reveals the complexity and sophistication of Norse mythological thought. Archaeological evidence demonstrates the deep historical roots of religious practices that appear in later literary sources, while runic inscriptions provide contemporary evidence for beliefs that might otherwise seem purely literary. The manuscript editions, despite their late date and Christian context, preserve detailed mythological narratives that find corroboration in material culture and linguistic evidence. The geographical distribution of sources also illuminates the cultural unity and diversity within Norse civilization. While Iceland preserved the most complete literary traditions, archaeological evidence from across Scandinavia demonstrates shared religious practices and beliefs. Regional variations in artifact styles, burial practices, and runic inscriptions reveal local adaptations of common mythological themes, suggesting a dynamic religious tradition that evolved through cultural contact and historical change. The cosmological framework preserved in Norse sources reveals a universe structured around Yggdrasil, the immense ash tree that serves as the cosmic axis connecting 9 distinct realms. This world tree, whose name translates to Yggdrasil's horse, represents far more than a simple geographical organizing principle. Archaeological evidence from ritual deposits and temple sites across Scandinavia demonstrates that the concept of a cosmic tree held profound religious significance, with miniature tree representations found in religious contexts dating back to the Bronze Age. Yggdrasil's physical description in the sources emphasizes its enormous scale and vital role in maintaining cosmic order. The tree's branches extend over all the worlds, while its 3 massive roots anchor it to different realms and draw sustenance from sacred wells. The Prose Edda describes how the tree's leaves provide food for Odin's goat Heidrun, whose milk feeds the Einherjar in Valhalla, while the hart Eiktherna feeds on the tree's branches, and from his antlers flow the rivers that supply water to all the worlds. This intricate ecological system demonstrates how Norse cosmology integrated natural observation with mythological understanding, creating a universe where divine and natural and supernatural elements functioned as interconnected systems. The tree faces constant threats that mirror the precarious nature of cosmic order in Norse thought. The dragon Nidhogger gnaws at its roots from below, while 4 stags browse on its branches above, representing the ongoing forces of destruction that require constant vigilance from the gods. The Norns, 3 female figures who control fate, daily tend the tree by sprinkling it with water and clay from the Well of Ord, demonstrating how even cosmic structures require active maintenance. This imagery reflects the Norse understanding that order and civilization exist in constant tension with chaos and destruction, requiring ongoing effort to maintain. The symbolic significance of Yggdrasil extends beyond its role as a cosmic support structure. The tree serves as a conduit for wisdom and transformation, most notably in Odin's shamanic ordeal, where he hangs from its branches for 9 days and nights to gain knowledge of the runes. This episode establishes the world tree as a liminal space where boundaries between life and death, knowledge and ignorance, divine and mortal, dissolve. The tree's association with horses through its name reflects the shamanic tradition of spiritual journeying, where the tree serves as the vehicle for travel between worlds. Asgard, the realm of the Aesir gods, occupies the highest position in the cosmic hierarchy and serves as the primary seat of divine authority. The realm's name, meaning enclosure of the gods, reflects its function as a fortified stronghold from which the gods maintain order throughout the 9 worlds. Archaeological evidence from Gamla Uppsala and other temple sites suggests that earthly sanctuaries were conceived as reflections of Asgard's divine architecture, with temple complexes featuring multiple buildings dedicated to different deities mirroring the various halls described in the sources. The realm's most prominent feature is Valhalla, Odin's vast hall where slain warriors feast and prepare for Ragnarok. The building's description emphasizes its enormous scale, with 540 doors each wide enough for 800 warriors to march through simultaneously. The hall's roof consists of golden shields, while spears serve as rafters, creating an architecture that celebrates martial prowess. The daily routine of the Einherjar, who fight each morning and feast each evening on the boar Saramner and mead from Hydron, establishes a cycle of death and renewal that prepares them for their ultimate role in the final battle. Gladsheim, Odin's other major hall, serves as the council chamber and contains the high seat Hlidskjaf, from which the Allfather can observe all 9 worlds. This throne's panoptic capabilities reflect the surveillance and knowledge-gathering that characterize Odin's rule, while its elevated position emphasizes the hierarchical nature of divine authority. The hall's 12 seats accommodate the principal male gods, establishing a divine council structure that parallels earthly political assemblies described in the sagas. Other significant structures in Asgard include Vingulf, the goddess's sanctuary, and various halls belonging to individual deities. Thor's hall, Bilskirner, features 540 rooms, making it the largest building in Asgard, while Baldur's hall, Bladablik, is described as having a roof of silver and golden pillars, from which nothing impure can enter. These architectural descriptions establish each deity's character and sphere of influence through their dwelling places, creating a divine geography that reflects the gods' individual personalities and roles. The Rainbow Bridge Bifrost connects Asgard to other realms, serving as both a transportation route and a defensive barrier. The bridge's 3 colors, red representing fire, blue indicating air, and green symbolizing water, demonstrate the Norse understanding of elemental forces, while its guardian Heimdall's vigilant watch establishes the constant threat that requires divine protection. The bridge's fragility, destined to break during Ragnarok under the weight of the sons of Muspel, reflects the temporary nature of cosmic order in Norse thought. Midgard, the human world, occupies a central position both geographically and conceptually in Norse cosmology. The realm's name, meaning middle enclosure, reflects its position between the divine realm above and the chaotic forces below, while its circular shape surrounded by the ocean and the Midgard serpent establishes clear boundaries between civilization and wilderness. Archaeological evidence from settlement patterns across Scandinavia demonstrates how this cosmological understanding influenced actual landscape organization, with farmsteads and villages conceived as ordered spaces carved from the surrounding wilderness. The creation of Midgard from the body of the primordial giant Ymir establishes the realm's fundamental connection to both order and chaos. The god's use of Ymir's flesh for earth, his blood for seas, his bones for mountains, and his skull for the sky creates a world that literally embodies the transformation of chaotic forces into ordered structures. This creation myth reflects the ongoing tension between civilization and wilderness that characterizes human existence in Norse thought, where cultivated land represents a temporary victory over the forces of entropy. The fortification surrounding Midgard, built by an unnamed giant master builder, demonstrates the constant threat that human civilization faces from chaotic forces. The story of this wall's construction, where the gods nearly lose Freya, the sun, and the moon to the giant before Loki's intervention, establishes the precarious nature of cosmic order and the necessity of divine protection for human survival. The wall's incomplete state, with one stone missing, reflects the imperfect nature of all defenses against chaos. Jotunheim, the realm of the giants, represents the primary source of opposition to divine and human order. The realm's harsh landscape, characterized by mountains, forests, and wilderness, contrasts sharply with the ordered architecture of Asgard and the cultivated lands of Midgard. The giants' association with natural forces, storms, earthquakes, avalanches, establishes them as embodiments of nature's destructive potential rather than simply evil beings. Their role as the gods' primary antagonists reflects the ongoing struggle between order and chaos that drives Norse mythological narratives. The giants' complex relationship with the gods demonstrates the ambiguous nature of this cosmic opposition. Many gods, including Odin and Thor, have giant ancestry, while others maintain relationships with the giant women that produce divine offspring. This intermingling suggests that the boundary between order and chaos is not absolute, but rather represents different aspects of cosmic forces that can be creative or destructive depending on context. The giants' possession of wisdom and magical objects that the gods require establishes them as necessary opponents, whose defeat often results in the gods' acquisition of power or knowledge. Utgard, the giants' primary stronghold, serves as a dark mirror to Asgard's divine architecture. The fortress's enormous scale and chaotic organization reflect the giants' nature as embodiments of uncontrolled natural forces, while its location at the edge of the world establishes its role as a boundary between cosmos and chaos. The famous journey of Thor and Loki to Utgard demonstrates how the giants' power often derives from illusion and trickery rather than direct confrontation, suggesting that chaos operates through deception and misdirection rather than simple opposition. Vanaheim, the realm of the Vanir gods, represents a different aspect of divine authority, focused on fertility, prosperity, and wisdom rather than warfare and order. The Vanir's association with agricultural cycles, sexual fertility, and wealth accumulation establishes them as deities concerned with the productive aspects of existence rather than its protective or destructive elements. The realm's description as a place of abundance and natural beauty contrasts with Asgard's martial architecture, reflecting different approaches to divine authority. The war between the Aesir and Vanir, which resulted in the exchange of hostages and the integration of Vanir deities into the Aesir pantheon, demonstrates the complex political relationships between different divine groups. The exchange of Njordr, Freyr and Freya to the Aesir in return for Honir and Mimir establishes a divine diplomacy that mirrors earthly political arrangements. The Vanir's particular expertise in magic and prophecy, especially the practice of Seidr, introduces elements of shamanic spirituality that complement the Aesir's more martial approach to divine authority. Alfheim, the realm of the Light Elves, represents the luminous aspects of supernatural beings associated with fertility, beauty, and beneficial magic. The Light Elves' description as beings fairer than the sun establishes their connection to solar symbolism and life-giving forces, while their association with Freya's rulership links them to the Vanir's fertility functions. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavian burial sites includes small figurines and amulets that may represent these beneficial supernatural beings, suggesting their importance in daily religious practice. The Light Elves' role as intermediaries between gods and humans appears in various contexts throughout the mythological sources. Their ability to influence human affairs through dreams, inspiration, and magical intervention establishes them as accessible supernatural beings who can provide assistance in daily life. The distinction between light elves and dark elves reflects the Norse understanding of supernatural beings as existing along a spectrum from beneficial to harmful, with their moral character determined by their relationship to light, fertility, and life-giving forces. Svartalfheim, also known as Nidavellir, serves as the realm of the dark elves or dwarves, master craftsmen whose underground workshops produce the magical objects that maintain cosmic order. The realm's subterranean location reflects the dwarves' association with mining, metalworking, and the transformation of raw materials into finished goods. Their creation from the maggots that fed on Ymir's corpse establishes their connection to death and decay, while their subsequent development into skilled artisans demonstrates the transformation of destructive forces into creative ones. The dwarves' production of the gods' most important magical items, Thor's hammer Mjolnir, Odin's spear Gungnir, Freya's ship Skidbladnir, establishes their crucial role in maintaining cosmic order despite their ambiguous moral status. Their workshops, described as vast underground complexes filled with forges and tools, represent the technological mastery that enables the gods' power. The dwarves' tendency to demand dangerous payments for their work, including the gods' lives or essential body parts, reflects the high cost of maintaining cosmic order. The realm's association with both wisdom and trickery appears in numerous stories where dwarves provide crucial assistance while simultaneously attempting to deceive or trap their divine customers. This duality reflects the Norse understanding of technology and craftsmanship as potentially beneficial or harmful depending on their application and the craftsman's intentions. Muspelheim, the realm of fire giants, represents the destructive forces that will ultimately consume the current world order during Ragnarok. The realm's location at the southern edge of the cosmos, blazing with eternal flames, establishes it as the source of the fire that will destroy and renew the world. Surtur, the realm's ruler, wields a flaming sword that will set the world ablaze, representing the inevitable triumph of entropy over order that characterizes Norse eschatology. The fire giants' role as agents of cosmic destruction distinguishes them from the frost giants of Jotunheim, who represent chaotic opposition to order rather than its ultimate termination. Muspelheim's flames provided the heat that melted the primordial ice and enabled the creation of the world, establishing fire as both creative and destructive force. The realm's sons, who will ride across Bifrost during Ragnarok, represent the final assault on divine order that cannot be prevented or defeated. Niflheim, the primordial realm of ice and mist, represents the cold, dark forces that existed before creation and will persist after destruction. The realm's association with the Fergelmer, from which all rivers flow, establishes it as the source of the primordial waters that enabled creation. The realm's perpetual cold and darkness contrast with Muspelheim's heat and light, creating the fundamental opposition between ice and fire that drives cosmological processes. The realm's role as the source of the poisonous rivers that flow through the other worlds establishes it as a place of both creation and corruption. The dragon Nidhogger's residence in Niflheim, where it gnaws on the roots of Yggdrasil and feeds on the corpses of Oathbreakers, establishes the realm's association with death and moral corruption. The realm's mists, which obscure vision and confuse travelers, represent the uncertainty and confusion that characterize existence at the boundaries of the ordered cosmos. Helheim, the realm of the dead, occupies a unique position in Norse cosmology as the destination for those who die of sickness, old age, or other causes not deemed heroic. The realm's ruler, Hel, appears as a half-living, half-dead figure whose appearance reflects the ambiguous nature of death in Norse thought. Her hall El-Judnir, with its high walls and barred gates, serves as a prison for the dishonored dead, while also providing a place of rest for those who lived ordinary lives. The journey to Helheim requires crossing the river Jol on the bridge Jalabru, guarded by the maiden Modgudr, who questions the dead about their identity and deeds. This journey establishes death as a transition requiring preparation and proper conduct rather than simply an ending. The realm's description as a place of neither punishment nor reward, but rather continued existence in a diminished state, reflects the Norse understanding of death as transformation rather than termination. The wells of Urd, Mimir, and Virgilmir serve as crucial sources of wisdom, fate, and primordial power that sustain the cosmic order. The Well of Urd, located beneath one of Yggdrasil's roots, serves as the meeting place for the Norns who determine the fate of gods and men. The well's water, described as so pure and holy that all things that enter it become white as swan's down, represents the source of cosmic justice and divine law. The Norns' daily practice of sprinkling the world tree with this water demonstrates the ongoing maintenance required to preserve cosmic order. The Well of Mimir, situated beneath another root of Yggdrasil, contains the waters of wisdom and memory. Odin's sacrifice of his eye to drink from this well establishes the high cost of acquiring ultimate knowledge, while Mimir's severed head, which guards the well and provides counsel to the gods, represents the transformation of death into wisdom. The well's association with memory reflects the Norns' understanding of wisdom as the accumulation and proper application of experience rather than abstract knowledge. Virgilmir, the spring in Niflheim from which all rivers flow, represents the primordial source of all waters and the beginning of cosmic processes. The spring's bubbling, boiling nature reflects the dynamic forces that drive creation and destruction, while its location in the realm of ice and mist establishes it as the point where opposing forces meet and generate new possibilities. The spring's role as the source of both life-giving and poisonous rivers demonstrates the ambiguous nature of primordial forces that can create or destroy depending on their direction and application. These three wells collectively represent the sources of fate, wisdom, and primordial power that sustain the cosmos. Their locations beneath Yggdrasil's roots establish them as foundational elements of cosmic order, while their different characteristics reflect the various types of knowledge and power required to maintain the world. The gods' dependence on these wells for guidance and sustenance demonstrates the limitations of divine authority and the necessity of drawing on sources beyond immediate control. The divine hierarchy of Norse mythology centers around two distinct pantheons whose eventual unification shaped the complex theological landscape of pre-Christian Scandinavia. The Aesir and Vanir represent fundamentally different approaches to divine authority, cosmic order, and the relationship between supernatural beings and the natural world. Archaeological evidence from temple sites across Scandinavia demonstrates that these theological distinctions reflected actual cultic practices, with different communities emphasizing either martial prowess and cosmic order, or fertility and natural abundance in their religious observances. The Aesir pantheon, led by Odin the All-Father, dominated the cosmic hierarchy through their association with warfare, wisdom, governance, and the maintenance of cosmic order against chaotic forces. Odin's complex character encompasses multiple aspects of divine authority, from his role as the gatherer of the slain, to his function as the seeker of wisdom who sacrifices comfort and safety for knowledge. His physical appearance, typically described as a tall, one-eyed figure wearing a broad-brimmed hat and dark cloak, reflects his role as a wanderer who moves between worlds, gathering information and testing mortals. The two ravens, Hugin and Munin, perch on his shoulders, flying across all 9 worlds each day to bring him news, while his 8-legged horse Sleipnir enables him to travel between realms with supernatural speed. Udurtirian's Hall Valhalla serves as the primary gathering place for the Aesir's military preparations, where the Einherjar train daily for Ragnarok under the supervision of the Valkyries. These warrior maidens, whose name means choosers of the slain, ride across battlefields to select worthy warriors for Odin's army. The Valkyries' dual nature as both beautiful maidens and fierce warriors reflects the Aesir's integration of aesthetic and martial values. While their ability to influence the outcome of battles demonstrates the gods' direct intervention in human affairs, archaeological finds from weapon deposits across Scandinavia include spears deliberately bent or broken before burial, suggesting ritual practices that parallel the Valkyries' selection of warriors for divine service. Thor, Odin's son and the most popular of the Aesir gods among common people, embodies the protective aspect of divine authority through his role as defender of both gods and humans against giant threats. His massive hammer Mjolnir, forged by the dwarven brothers Brokkr and Eitri, never misses its target and always returns to his hand after being thrown. The hammer's ability to level mountains in its association with thunder and lightning establish Thor as a weather deity whose power protects agricultural communities from destructive storms. His red beard, enormous strength, and quick temper reflect his straightforward approach to problem-solving, typically involving direct confrontation rather than the subtle strategies favored by his father. Thor's iron gloves, Jarngreipr, and his belt of strength, Megingjord, double his already formidable power, while his goat-drawn chariot enables him to travel across the sky, creating thunder with its wheels. The goats Tangrasnir and Tangjoster can be slaughtered and eaten each evening, then restored to life the next morning by Thor's hammer, providing a renewable food source that reflects the cyclical nature of agricultural abundance. This daily death and resurrection parallels seasonal cycles observed in Scandinavian farming communities, where Thor's protection ensured successful harvests and livestock survival through harsh winters. The archaeological record preserves numerous Thor's hammer amulets, particularly from the 9th and 10th centuries, when Christian conversion created a need for explicit pagan symbols to counter Christian crosses. These miniature hammers, often worn as pendants, demonstrate Thor's popularity among common people who relied on his protection in daily life. The distribution of these amulets across Scandinavia, Iceland, and Viking settlements in Britain and Ireland indicates the widespread nature of Thor's cult and its importance in maintaining Norse religious identity during periods of cultural change. Baldur, described as the most beautiful and beloved of the gods, represents the Aesir's association with light purity and cosmic harmony. His halberdablik, with its silver roof and golden pillars, allows no impurity to enter, establishing him as a deity of moral perfection and divine justice. His prophetic dreams foretelling his own death prompted the gods to extract oaths from all things in creation to never harm him, creating a period of universal peace that temporarily suspended the cosmic conflict between order and chaos. The single exception, the mistletoe that Loki fashioned into the dart that killed Baldur, demonstrates how even the smallest oversight can lead to cosmic catastrophe. Baldur's death, orchestrated by Loki's manipulation of the blind god Hoda, represents the first crack in the cosmic order that will eventually lead to Ragnarok. His wife Nanna's death from grief and their joint funeral on the ship Ringhorni, pushed out to sea and set ablaze by the giantess Hyrrokin, establishes the elaborate funeral practices that archaeological evidence shows were common among Scandinavian elites. The ship burial tradition, documented at sites like Sutton Hoo in England and Oseberg in Norway, reflects the belief that proper funeral rites ensured the deceased's successful journey to the afterlife. The gods' unsuccessful attempt to retrieve Balder from Helheim, thwarted by Loki's refusal to weep for the dead god, demonstrates the irreversible nature of cosmic decline in Norse thought. Balder's promised return after Ragnarok, when he will rule over the renewed world with his brother Hoda, establishes the cyclical nature of cosmic destruction and renewal that characterizes Norse eschatology. This pattern of death and rebirth reflects seasonal cycles observed in northern climates, where the apparent death of vegetation in winter precedes spring's renewal. Frigg, Odin's wife and queen of the Aesir, governs the domestic sphere and possesses the power of prophecy, though she rarely reveals what she knows. Her hall fenceler, described as having a silver roof, serves as a gathering place for the goddesses and a center of domestic authority that complements Odin's martial leadership. Her role in attempting to protect Balder by extracting oaths from all things demonstrates the maternal aspect of divine authority, while her failure to prevent his death illustrates the limitations of even divine protection against fate. Frigg's association with spinning and weaving connects her to the Norns' work with the threads of fate, suggesting that domestic activities possess cosmic significance in Norse thought. Archaeological evidence from women's graves across Scandinavia includes spindle whorls, looms, and weaving tools that indicate the high status accorded to textile production. The elaborate textiles found in ship burials and high-status graves demonstrate the skill and artistry that made weaving a prestigious activity suitable for divine patronage. Tyr, the one-handed god of war and justice, represents the Aesir's commitment to cosmic order, even at great personal cost. His sacrifice of his hand to enable the binding of the wolf Fenrir demonstrates the principle that maintaining cosmic order requires individual sacrifice for the greater good. The wolf's binding with the magical chain Gleipnir, created by the dwarves from impossible materials including the sound of a cat's footstep and the breath of a fish, represents the complex magical processes required to contain chaotic forces. Tyr's role as the god who presides over legal assemblies and oath-taking establishes him as the divine guarantor of social order and justice. His name, cognate with the Latin deus and Sanskrit deus, indicates his ancient status as a sky god whose authority predates Odin's rise to prominence. The reduction of his role in later sources, where he appears primarily in the context of Fenrir's binding, suggests the evolution of Norse religious thought toward more complex theological concepts, centered on Odin's multifaceted authority. The Thing assembly is documented in historical sources and archaeological remains across Scandinavia, operated under Tyr's divine protection, with oath-breaking and legal violations considered offenses against cosmic order itself. The elaborate legal procedures described in medieval law codes, including the use of sacred rings and ritual formulas, reflect the integration of divine authority with human justice that characterized Norse legal thought. The Vanir pantheon, representing fertility, prosperity, and natural abundance, approach divine authority through their mastery of agricultural cycles, sexual reproduction, and wealth accumulation. Their association with the Earth's productive capacity established them as deities concerned with the material foundations of civilization, rather than its military protection or cosmic ordering. Archaeological evidence from agricultural communities across Scandinavia includes ritual deposits of tools, seeds, and harvest offerings that demonstrate the practical religious observances associated with Vanir worship. Njorda, the principal Vanir deity to join the Aesir through the hostage exchange, governs the sea, wind, and fishing that provided essential resources for Scandinavian communities. His Hall Noten, located by the seashore, reflects his maritime associations, while his ability to calm storms and ensure successful fishing expeditions made him particularly important to coastal populations. His marriage to the giant Skadi, goddess of winter and hunting, represents the integration of different seasonal cycles and economic activities within a single divine relationship. The couple's marital arrangement, where they spend 9 nights in Skadi's mountain hall Thrymheimer and 3 nights in Njorda's coastal residence, reflects the seasonal movement between different economic activities that characterize Scandinavian life. The compromise ultimately fails due to their incompatible preferences. Njorda cannot tolerate the howling of wolves in the mountains, while Skadi finds the cries of seabirds unbearable, demonstrating the tensions between different approaches to natural resource exploitation. Freyr, Njorda's son and the most prominent Vanir deity, governs agricultural fertility, sexual reproduction, and the prosperity that results from successful farming. His association with the boar, an animal that represents both fertility and ferocity, establishes him as a deity capable of both creative and destructive actions. His golden boar Gullinborsti, created by the dwarven brothers Broka and Eitri, can run through air and water faster than any horse, while its golden bristles provide light in darkness, symbolizing the life-giving power of the sun. Freyr's ship Skidbladner, also crafted by dwarven artisans, can sail through air as well as water, and can be folded up and carried in a pocket when not needed. This magical vessel represents the mobility and adaptability required for successful trade and agricultural exchange, while its ability to always find favorable winds demonstrates divine support for legitimate commercial activities. The ship's capacity to hold all the gods when fully expanded establishes Freyr's role as a unifying force who brings together different divine factions. The god's self-imposed exile from Asgard after giving away his magical sword to win the giant Skirda as his bride demonstrates the Vanir's different approach to cosmic conflict. Unlike the Aesir, who maintain their power through constant vigilance and military preparedness, the Vanir are willing to sacrifice martial capability for personal fulfillment and natural harmony. Freyr's prophesied death at Ragnarok, killed by Surtur because he lacks his, illustrates the consequences of prioritizing fertility and love over military strength. Archaeological evidence from temple sites associated with Freyr includes phallic symbols, fertility figurines, and agricultural tools that demonstrate the explicit connection between divine worship and human reproduction. The temple at Gamla Ups, described by medieval sources as containing a statue of Freyr with an enormous phallus, reflects the open acknowledgement of sexuality as a divine force, requiring religious attention and proper ritual observance. Freyr, the most prominent goddess in the Norse pantheon, embodies the Vanir's mastery of both fertility and magical knowledge. Her association with the practice of Seda, a form of shamanic involving prophecy, shape-changing, and spiritual travel, establishes her as a deity who bridges the gap between physical and spiritual realms. Her teaching of Seda to the Aesir, particularly to Odin, demonstrates the Vanir's contribution of magical knowledge to the unified pantheon. Freyr's Hall, Cicerimnir, located in the field Folkvanger, receives half of all warriors slain in battle, with the other half going to Odin's Valhalla. This division of the heroic dead reflects the integration of Vanir and Aesir authority structures, while establishing Freyr's role as a war goddess despite her primary association with fertility and love. Her ability to transform into a falcon using her feather cloak demonstrates the shape-changing abilities associated with Seta practice, while her tears of red gold reflect the connection between emotional intensity and material wealth. The goddess association with the Brisingamen necklace, obtained through sexual relationships with 4 dwarven craftsmen, establishes the Vanir's different approach to acquiring magical objects. While the Aesir typically obtain powerful items through force, trickery, or sacrifice, the Vanir are willing to use sexual relationships as a form of exchange that benefits both parties. This approach reflects the Vanir's understanding of fertility and sexuality as positive forces that create rather than consume value. The Aesir-Vanir War represents the most significant conflict in Norse mythology between different approaches to divine authority and cosmic order. The war's origin in the Aesir's mistreatment of the Vanir sorceress Gulv, whom they repeatedly killed and burned only to see her return to life, demonstrates the fundamental incompatibility between the two pantheons' approaches to magical knowledge and divine power. The Vanir's successful resistance to Aesir military superiority forced a negotiated settlement that recognized the legitimacy of both approaches to divine authority. The exchange of hostages that ended the war established a new model of divine governance that integrated martial and fertility aspects of cosmic order. The Aesir sent Honir, described as tall and handsome but lacking in wisdom, and Mimir, the wise giant whose counsel was essential for decision-making. The Vanir's decapitation of Mimir when they discovered Honir's limitations demonstrates their refusal to accept deception in diplomatic relationships, while Odin's preservation of Mimir's head as an advisor establishes the transformation of conflict into wisdom. The Vanir's integration into the Aesir pantheon through the hostage exchange created a more complex divine hierarchy that balanced different aspects of cosmic authority. Jorda, Freyr, and Freya retained their distinct characteristics and spheres of influence while accepting Odin's overall leadership, creating a theological synthesis that reflected the cultural integration occurring in Scandinavian society during the Viking Age. This divine diplomacy provided a model for human political relationships, where different groups could maintain their distinct identities while participating in larger political structures. The war's resolution through negotiation rather than total victory reflects the Norse understanding that cosmic order requires the integration of opposing forces, rather than the elimination of one by the other. The Aesir's martial prowess and the Vanir's fertility magic both contribute essential elements to the maintenance of cosmic order, while their combination creates a more robust divine authority capable of addressing different types of threats and challenges. The distinct characteristics that differentiated the Aesir from the Vanir continue to influence their roles and relationships even after their integration into a unified pantheon. The Aesir's association with war, wisdom, and governance established them as the primary defenders of cosmic order against chaotic forces, while their hierarchical organization under Odin's leadership reflected the military command structures necessary for effective defense. Their holds in Asgard, with their martial architecture and emphasis on preparation for battle, demonstrate their ongoing commitment to the military aspects of divine authority. The Vanir's association with fertility, prosperity, and natural abundance established them as the primary sources of the material wealth and biological reproduction that sustained civilization. Their magic, particularly the practice of Seta, provided access to knowledge and power that complemented the Aesir's more direct approaches to problem-solving. Their integration into the Aesir pantheon brought essential capabilities that enhanced the gods' ability to maintain cosmic order through both military and magical means. The theological implications of this integration extended beyond simple political alliance to create a more sophisticated understanding of divine authority that recognized the necessity of both martial and fertility aspects of cosmic order. The Aesir's strength in warfare and governance required the Vanir's expertise in agriculture and magic to create a sustainable civilization, while the Vanir's focus on fertility and prosperity needed the Aesir's protection to flourish in a cosmos threatened by chaotic forces. Among the complex pantheon of Norse deities, Odin stands as the most enigmatic and multifaceted figure, embodying contradictions that reflect the harsh realities of existence in the medieval Scandinavian world. His relentless pursuit of wisdom, achieved through profound personal sacrifice, establishes him as a deity who understands that knowledge and power require payment in suffering and loss. The most famous account of this pursuit occurs at Mimir's well, where the severed head of the wise giant Mimir guards waters that contain all knowledge and memory of past, present, and future events. The Well of Mimir, situated beneath one of Yggdrasil's 3 massive roots, represents the ultimate source of cosmic wisdom that even the gods cannot access without significant cost. Mimir's head, preserved by Odin's magical arts after the Vanir decapitated the giant during the hostage exchange, speaks only truth and possesses memory stretching back to the beginning of time. The well's waters, described as clearer than crystal yet containing the accumulated wisdom of all existence, reflect the Norse understanding that true knowledge transcends simple information gathering to encompass deep understanding of cosmic principles and hidden connections. Odin's approach to Mimir demonstrates the calculated nature of his wisdom-seeking. Rather than attempting to steal the water or trick the guardian, he acknowledges the legitimate price demanded for such knowledge. The sacrifice of his eye, plucked from his own head and cast into the well's depths, represents a permanent physical diminishment that marks him forever as one who has paid the ultimate price for wisdom. This self-mutilation transforms Odin from a complete being into a deliberately damaged one, whose missing eye serves as a constant reminder of the cost of knowledge. The symbolic significance of the eye sacrifice extends beyond simple payment to encompass the transformation of perception itself. The loss of physical sight in one eye paradoxically grants Odin enhanced spiritual vision, enabling him to perceive hidden truths and connections invisible to those who retain their complete physical faculties. This exchange of immediate surface-level perception for deeper, more profound understanding reflects the shamanic tradition of deliberate self-limitation to achieve transcendent knowledge. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavian bog deposits includes numerous examples of deliberately damaged weapons and jewelry thrown into sacred waters, suggesting that the concept of sacrifice to gain divine favor or knowledge held practical religious significance. The Gunderstrup cauldron depicts scenes of ritual sacrifice and transformation that parallel Odin's ordeals, while runic inscriptions from across the Viking world invoke his wisdom-seeking as a model for human spiritual development. The second great ordeal that defines Odin's character involves his 9-day hanging from Yggdrasil, wounded by his own spear without food or water, to gain knowledge of the runes. This shamanic initiation described in the Havamal presents Odin as both sacrificer and sacrificed, offering himself to himself in a ritual that transcends normal categories of divine and mortal experience. The world tree serves as both gallows and altar, while the spear wound ensures that this hanging represents genuine suffering rather than a mere symbolic gesture. The 9-day duration of this ordeal carries deep symbolic significance in Norse cosmology, where the number 9 appears repeatedly in descriptions of cosmic structure and divine activity. The 9 worlds connected by Yggdrasil, the 9 nights of ritual required for various magical workings, and the 9 mothers of Heimdall all reflect the sacred nature of this number in Norse thought. Odin's 9-day hanging thus aligns his personal transformation with fundamental cosmic principles, suggesting that his acquisition of runic knowledge represents a form of rebirth that parallels the creation of the world itself. The runes that Odin discovers during this ordeal represent far more than a simple writing system. In Norse understanding, runes embody the fundamental forces and principles that govern reality, with each symbol containing both practical and magical significance. The word rune itself derives from the Old Norse run, meaning secret or mystery, indicating that these symbols provide access to hidden knowledge about the nature of existence. Odin's mastery of the runes grants him the ability to influence fate, communicate across vast distances, and understand the secret connections that bind all things together. The physical description of Odin's hanging emphasizes the genuine nature of his suffering. Pierced by Gungnir, his own spear that never misses its target, he experiences the agony of a mortal wound while maintaining the divine consciousness necessary to perceive and understand the runes as they reveal themselves. The lack of food or water during this period represents the complete abandonment of physical comfort and security that characterizes true shamanic initiation. His position, suspended between earth and sky, places him in the liminal space where transformation becomes possible. The moment of revelation, when Odin finally perceives the runes and grasps their meaning, represents the culmination of his deliberate self-torture. The rune's appearance to him in his extremity suggests that such knowledge becomes accessible only to those who have abandoned all attachment to physical well-being and social position. His ability to take up the runes, described as screaming as he grasps them, indicates that even the acquisition of this knowledge involves additional suffering and effort. The practical applications of Odin's runic knowledge extend throughout Norse mythology, where he employs these symbols to bind enemies, communicate with the dead, and influence the events across all 9 worlds. His use of runes to revive the dead Valva in Voluspa demonstrates their power over life and death, while his employment of binding runes to constrain hostile forces shows their practical military applications. The rune's appearance on weapons, amulets, and memorial stones throughout the archaeological record indicates that Odin's shamanic acquisition of this knowledge provided a model for human magical practice. Odin's role as psychopomp, the divine guide who escorts souls between worlds, establishes him as the primary mediator between life and death in Norse cosmology. This function extends far beyond simple transportation to encompass the selection, preparation, and organization of the dead for their roles in the cosmic order. His leadership of the Wild Hunt, a spectral procession that sweeps across the sky during winter storms, demonstrates his active involvement in gathering the souls of the worthy dead for service in his army. The Wild Hunt's composition reflects Odin's authority over different categories of supernatural beings and deceased mortals. The procession includes the Einherjar, warriors who died gloriously in battle and now serve as Odin's elite troops, alongside various supernatural beings including elves, spirits, and the souls of the restless dead. The hunt's appearance during violent weather, particularly winter storms, connects Odin's death-gathering activities. the natural forces that bring destruction and renewal to the world. The hunt's physical manifestation varies according to local traditions, but consistently features Odin as the mounted leader riding Sleipnir, his 8-legged horse capable of traveling between worlds. The sound of the hunt's passage, described as the howling of wind and the thunder of hoofbeats, strikes terror into mortals who hear it, while those who witness the procession directly risk being swept up and carried away to join the eternal ride. This recruitment method reflects Odin's opportunistic approach to building his army, where he claims suitable souls regardless of their original intentions or destinations. The Einherjar, literally those who fight alone, represent the elite warriors chosen by Odin's Valkyries from among the battle-dead. These selected warriors undergo transformation from mortal fighters into divine soldiers whose daily routine prepares them for the ultimate battle at Ragnarok. Their existence in Valhalla involves constant training through combat that results in daily death and resurrection, creating warriors who have overcome the fear of death through repeated experience of dying and returning to life. The selection criteria for Einherjar status reflect Odin's strategic thinking about the requirements for fighting in the final battle. The Valkyries choose warriors based not only on their combat skill, but also on their courage, loyalty, and ability to function effectively in supernatural combat situations. The selected dead must demonstrate willingness to sacrifice themselves for the greater good, tactical intelligence under pressure, and the psychological resilience necessary to face cosmic-level threats without breaking. The daily routine of the Einherjar in Valhalla combines martial training with feasting that reinforces their bonds of loyalty and shared purpose. Each morning, they arm themselves and fight in the courtyard until all are killed, then rise again to feast on the flesh of the boar Saramnir, who is slaughtered and cooked each day only to return to life each evening. This cycle of death, resurrection, and celebration creates warriors who understand that death in battle represents transition rather than termination, while the shared meals build the social cohesion necessary for effective military cooperation. The meats served at these feasts, flowing from the udders of the goat Hydron, who feeds on Yggdrasil's leaves, provides more than simple refreshment. This divine beverage grants the Einherjar enhanced strength, courage, and tactical insight while reinforcing their supernatural nature as beings who exist beyond normal mortal limitations. The unlimited supply of mead ensures that the warriors can maintain their enhanced capabilities indefinitely, while the ritual of shared drinking creates bonds of loyalty that transcend individual self-interest. Odin's relationship with his ravens Hugin and Munin represents one of the most distinctive aspects of his character, as the god who gathers information from across all 9 worlds. These ravens, whose names mean thought and memory, serve as extensions of Odin's consciousness, flying each day across the entire cosmos to observe events and return with detailed reports. Their daily flights begin at dawn and conclude at evening, when they perch on Odin's shoulders to whisper their observations directly into his ears. The raven's supernatural capabilities exceed those of normal birds, enabling them to travel between worlds, understand all languages, and perceive hidden truths invisible to other observers. Their ability to witness events across vast distances simultaneously suggests that they exist partially outside normal spatial limitations, while their perfect recall ensures that no information escapes Odin's attention. This comprehensive surveillance network provides the All-Father with the intelligence necessary to anticipate threats and opportunities across the entire cosmos. The symbolic significance of ravens in Norse culture extends beyond their role as Odin's messengers to encompass their association with battlefields and death. Ravens and crows naturally gather at sites of carnage to feed on the dead, making them obvious symbols of war's aftermath and the transition between life and death. Their intelligence and adaptability, demonstrated through their ability to use tools and solve complex problems, establishes them as appropriate companions for a god whose primary characteristics include cunning and strategic thinking. Archaeological evidence from across Scandinavia includes numerous depictions of ravens in contexts that suggest their religious significance. The Vendel period helmets from Sweden feature bronze plates showing warriors accompanied by ravens, while the Sutton Hoo helmet from England displays similar imagery. These artistic representations indicate that the association between ravens and divine authority extended beyond purely mythological contexts to influence actual military and religious practices. Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged horse, represents the ultimate expression of supernatural mobility and the ability to transcend normal limitations of space and time. Born from Loki's shape-shifting encounter with the stallion Svadilfari, Sleipnir possesses capabilities that enable Odin to travel between worlds with unmatched speed and to carry riders into realms normally inaccessible to living beings. His 8 legs, rather than simply doubling normal equine speed, grant him the ability to move through different dimensions of existence simultaneously. The horse's gray color and supernatural origin establish him as a liminal being who exists between categories of natural and supernatural, living and dead, mortal and divine. His ability to carry riders into Helheim, demonstrated during Hermodra's journey to attempt Baldr's rescue, shows that Sleipnir can traverse boundaries that normally separate the living from the dead. This capability makes him an essential tool for Odin's role as psychopomp and his function as the god who gathers wisdom from all possible sources. The practical applications of Sleipnir's abilities extend throughout Norse mythology, where he enables Odin to appear suddenly at crucial moments, escape from dangerous situations, and maintain his network of contacts across all 9 worlds. His capacity to run through air, over water, and across the Rainbow Bridge, Bifrost demonstrates the complete freedom of movement that characterizes divine authority in Norse thought. The horse's loyalty to Odin, never wavering despite the dangerous nature of their journeys, reflects the absolute trust required between a god and his primary means of transportation. The symbolic significance of Sleipnir's 8 legs has generated extensive scholarly discussion, with interpretations ranging from doubled normal speed to representation of the legs of pallbearers carrying the dead. The most compelling interpretation connects the 8 legs to shamanic traditions of spiritual travel, where the shaman's horse represents the vehicle for journeying between different levels of reality. This understanding establishes Sleipnir as the ultimate shamanic horse, capable of carrying his rider into any realm of existence. Odin's wolves Jerry and Freki, whose names mean greedy and ravenous, serve as both companions and symbols of his predatory nature as the god who devours the battle-dead. These wolves, fed by Odin's own food since he requires only wine for sustenance, represent the hungry, consuming aspect of divine authority that claims lives and resources to maintain cosmic order. Their constant presence at Odin's side during feasts and councils demonstrates the integration of predatory and civilized aspects of divine rule. The wolves' supernatural nature enables them to serve as both hunting companions and instruments of divine justice, capable of tracking enemies across vast distances and delivering Odin's vengeance to those who violate cosmic order. Their ability to understand human speech and follow complex commands establishes them as intelligent agents rather than simple animals, while their fierce loyalty to Odin demonstrates the bonds that tie predatory forces to divine authority. The feeding relationship between Odin and his wolves reveals important aspects of his character as a god who transcends normal biological requirements. His ability to sustain himself on wine alone, sharing his solid food with Jerry and Freki, suggests that his divine nature has evolved beyond normal physical needs toward a more spiritual form of existence. This transcendence of biological limitations reflects his shamanic transformation through the ordeals at Mimir's Well and on Yggdrasil. The wolves' role in Odin's daily routine extends beyond simple companionship to encompass their function as extensions of his predatory consciousness. Their presence during his decision-making processes suggests that they represent the aggressive, consuming aspects of divine wisdom that must be integrated with more civilized considerations. Their readiness for violence provides Odin with the option of direct action when diplomatic or magical solutions prove insufficient. Odin's reputation as a shapeshifter reflects his mastery of the shamanic arts that enable him to transcend normal physical limitations and assume forms appropriate to specific situations. His ability to transform into various animals, including ravens, wolves, serpents, and horses, demonstrates the fluid relationship between identity and form that characterizes advanced magical practice. These transformations serve practical purposes, enabling him to gather information, escape danger, and influence events while maintaining anonymity. The god's wandering nature, manifested through his frequent journeys across all 9 worlds in various disguises, establishes him as a deity who refuses to remain confined to the comfortable isolation of Asgard. His appearances among mortals, typically as a tall, one-eyed figure wearing a broad-brimmed hat and dark cloak, serve multiple purposes including testing human character, gathering intelligence, and recruiting worthy individuals for divine service. These journeys demonstrate his commitment to direct involvement in the affairs of all worlds, rather than distant, aloof governance. The various names and identities that Odin assumes during his wanderings reflect different aspects of his character and the specific purposes of particular journeys. As Grimnir, the Masked One, he appears as a mysterious figure who tests the hospitality and wisdom of mortals through riddling contests and challenges. As Gangleri, the Way-Weary, he presents himself as a traveling seeker of knowledge who asks probing questions about cosmic mysteries. These multiple identities enable him to approach different situations with appropriate personas while maintaining his essential character. Odin's reputation as an oathbreaker represents perhaps the most controversial aspect of his character, reflecting the complex relationship between divine authority and conventional morality in Norse thought. His willingness to violate sworn agreements when cosmic necessity demands it demonstrates the principle that maintaining universal order sometimes requires actions that violate particular moral codes. This pragmatic approach to oath reflects the harsh realities of leadership in a world where absolute adherence to agreements can lead to cosmic catastrophe. The most famous example of Odin's oath-breaking involves his treatment of the giant master builder who constructed Asgard's wall. The god's agreement to pay the builder with Freya, the sun and the moon if he completed the work within a single represented a bargain that would have catastrophically weakened divine authority. Odin's decision to enable Loki's interference with the work, preventing its completion and avoiding payment, demonstrates his willingness to use deception and trickery to protect cosmic order. This pattern of oath-breaking for the greater good appears throughout Norse mythology, where Odin consistently prioritizes cosmic stability over personal honor or conventional morality. His manipulation of heroes through false promises, his abandonment of loyal followers when their usefulness ends, and his willingness to sacrifice individuals for strategic advantage all reflect the ruthless pragmatism that characterizes effective leadership in a cosmos under constant threat. The paradoxical nature of Odin's wisdom and cunning reflects the complex relationship between knowledge and morality in Norse thought. His possession of ultimate wisdom, gained through profound sacrifice and suffering, does not translate into conventional moral behavior, but rather into a transcendent understanding of cosmic necessity that operates beyond normal ethical categories. This wisdom enables him to perceive the hidden connections and long-term consequences that escape ordinary understanding, while his cunning provides the practical skills necessary to act on this knowledge. The integration of wisdom and cunning in Odin's character creates a deity who embodies both the highest aspirations of divine knowledge and the practical necessities of effective leadership. His ability to perceive ultimate truths through his sacrifice at Mimir's well and his mastery of the runes provides him with unparalleled understanding of cosmic principles, while his skill in deception, manipulation, and strategic thinking enables him to apply this knowledge effectively in practical situations. Thor's massive frame dominated the divine hierarchy not through political maneuvering or mystical knowledge, but through sheer physical prowess and an unwavering commitment to protecting both gods and mortals from the constant threat of giant incursions. Standing head and shoulders above most gods, his red beard crackling with static electricity and his hands capable of crushing boulders, Thor represented the most direct and comprehensible form of divine protection available to Scandinavian communities. His straightforward approach to problem-solving, typically involving the application of overwhelming force to hostile entities, made him the most accessible deity in the Norse pantheon for common people who faced daily struggles against natural disasters, crop failures, and violent raids. The god's primary weapon, Mjolnir, represented the pinnacle of dwarven craftsmanship and magical engineering. Forged by the brothers Brokkr and Eitri in their underground workshop, the hammer emerged from their competition with Loki's commissioned craftsmen as the most powerful weapon in existence. The hammer's distinctive short handle, resulting from Loki's interference during its creation when he transformed into a fly and stung Brokkr's eye, paradoxically enhanced its effectiveness by enabling Thor to wield it with devastating speed and accuracy. The weapon's iron head, inscribed with protective runes and blessed by the gods themselves, could level mountains with a single blow and create thunderclaps that echoed across all 9 worlds. Mjolnir's supernatural properties extended far beyond simple destructive capability to encompass its role as a tool of consecration and blessing. The hammer's ability to sanctify marriages, bless newborn children, and consecrate important oaths made it an essential instrument of divine authority in maintaining social order. Archaeological evidence from across Scandinavia includes numerous miniature hammer amulets, particularly from the 9th and 10th centuries, when Christian conversion pressures made explicit pagan symbols increasingly important for maintaining religious identity. These tiny replicas, often worn as pendants or sewn into clothing, demonstrated the widespread belief in Thor's protective power and the hammer's ability to ward off malevolent forces. The hammer's most remarkable characteristic involved its unerring accuracy and inevitable return to Thor's hand after being thrown. This supernatural homing ability enabled the god to engage multiple enemies simultaneously, hurling Mjolnir at distant targets while continuing to fight with his bare hands, secure in the knowledge that his primary weapon would return when needed. The hammer's flight path, described as creating lightning bolts that illuminated the sky and thunder that shook the earth, provided visual and auditory confirmation of Thor's intervention in mortal affairs. Farmers across Scandinavia interpreted sudden thunderstorms as evidence of Thor's battles with giants, while the appearance of lightning during crucial moments in human conflict suggested divine approval or intervention. The belt Megan-jawed, Thor's second most important magical item, doubled his already formidable strength when worn, enabling him to lift objects and deliver blows that would otherwise exceed even his divine capabilities. This belt, crafted by the same dwarven artisans who created Mjolnir, consisted of intricately woven metal threads that expanded and contracted to fit Thor's waist perfectly while channeling and amplifying his natural power. The belt's activation required conscious effort from Thor, who typically reserved its use for situations requiring maximum strength, such as lifting the Midgard serpent during his famous fishing expedition, or restraining particularly powerful giants during combat. The iron gloves Jarngropa completed Thor's essential equipment, protecting his hands from the intense heat and magical forces generated by Mjolnir's operation, while enabling him to grip the hammer's handle securely during the most violent combat situations. These gloves, forged from the same celestial iron used in Mjolnir's construction, bore protective runes that prevented hostile magic from interfering with Thor's weapon handling. The gloves' supernatural durability ensured that they could withstand the tremendous forces generated when Thor caught Mjolnir after its return flight, while their enhanced grip prevented the hammer from being knocked from his hands during combat. Thor's chariot, drawn by the goats Tangrisnir and Tangengiasta, provided him with rapid transportation across the sky, while creating the thunder that announced his presence to both enemies and allies. These supernatural goats, whose names meant Teeth-bearer and Teeth-grinder, possessed the remarkable ability to be slaughtered and eaten each evening, then restored to life the following morning when Thor touched their remains with Mjolnir. This daily cycle of death and resurrection provided Thor with a renewable food source during long journeys, while demonstrating the hammer's life-giving properties that complemented its destructive capabilities. The chariot's wheels, reinforced with iron rims and fitted with supernatural axles that never broke or wore out, created the rolling thunder that accompanied Thor's passage across the heavens. The vehicle's construction, featuring a platform large enough to accommodate Thor's massive frame and strong enough to withstand the stresses of high-speed aerial travel, reflected dwarven engineering adapted to divine requirements. The chariot's ability to travel through air, over water, and across the rainbow bridge Bifrost demonstrated Thor's freedom of movement throughout the cosmos, while its distinctive sound provided advance warning of his arrival to both friends and enemies. The journey to Utgard represents one of Thor's most significant adventures, demonstrating both his formidable capabilities and the limitations that even divine power faces when confronting supernatural trickery. Accompanied by Loki and two human servants, Tjalfi and Roskva, Thor set out for the giant's stronghold in response to various provocations and challenges that demanded direct divine intervention. The journey's initial stages revealed Thor's character through his interactions with mortal farmers, whose hospitality he repaid by sharing his goat's meat, while strictly instructing them to avoid breaking the bones to ensure proper resurrection. The incident with the broken goat bone, caused by Tjalfi's curiosity about the marrow inside, demonstrated both Thor's fierce temper and his ultimate fairness in dealing with mortal mistakes. When morning came and one limped due to the broken bone, Thor's initial rage threatened to destroy the entire household until the family's obvious terror and genuine remorse moved him to accept the children's service as compensation. This episode established the relationship between divine power and mortal responsibility that characterized Thor's interactions with humans throughout his adventures. The encounter with the giant Skrymir during the journey revealed the sophisticated illusions and magical deceptions that giants employed to neutralize Thor's straightforward approach to conflict resolution. The enormous giant, whose snoring created windstorms and whose food bag resisted all attempts to open it, represented a type of opponent that could not be defeated through direct application of force. Thor's 3 mighty hammer blows to the sleeping giant's head, each powerful enough to embed Mjolnir deep in solid rock, apparently caused only minor discomfort to Skrymir, who dismissed them as falling leaves or acorns. The arrival at Utgard itself presented Thor with challenges that tested his abilities in ways that conventional combat could not. The fortress's enormous scale, with gates so tall that the travelers had to squeeze between the bars to enter, established the giant's realm as a place where normal physical laws operated differently. The giant king Utgard Loki's challenges, presented as simple contests of strength, speed, and appetite, concealed magical deceptions that made victory impossible through conventional means. Thor's drinking contest against what appeared to be a simple horn revealed the giant's ability to connect their challenges to cosmic forces beyond any individual's capacity to overcome. The horn's other end, secretly connected to the ocean itself, meant that Thor's prodigious drinking capacity, sufficient to drain lakes and rivers, could only slightly lower the sea level. This challenge demonstrated how the giants' power often derived from their connection to fundamental natural forces rather than individual supernatural abilities. The wrestling match with the old woman Ellie, who represented old age itself, provided Thor with his most humiliating defeat and his most important lesson about the limitations of physical power. Despite his divine strength, enhanced by Megingjord and supported by his fierce determination, Thor found himself gradually forced to one knee by an opponent whose power derived from the inevitable passage of time that affects all beings. This defeat taught Thor that some forces transcend even divine authority and cannot be overcome through strength alone. The revelation of the giant's deceptions, disclosed by Utgard Loki after the contest concluded, demonstrated the sophisticated magical knowledge that enabled giant society to survive despite their apparent vulnerability to Thor's hammer. Skrymir's true identity as Utgard Loki himself, the food bag sealed with magical iron wire, and the sleeping giant's protection by invisible mountains that absorbed Thor's hammer blows, all revealed the complex illusions that giants employed to level the playing field against divine opponents. The fishing expedition for Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, represents Thor's most ambitious attempt to eliminate a cosmic threat through direct confrontation. Accompanied by the giant Hymir, whose reluctant cooperation provided the necessary boat and fishing expertise, Thor set out to catch the enormous serpent that encircled Midgard in the ocean's depths. The expedition's preparation required obtaining suitable bait, which Thor secured by decapitating Hymir's largest ox and using its head to attract the serpent's attention. The fishing expedition's dramatic climax occurred when Jormungandr took the bait and Thor began hauling the serpent toward the surface. The god's tremendous strength, amplified by Megingjord and channeled through his iron gloves, enabled him to lift the serpent's massive head above the water, despite the creature's desperate struggles to escape. The serpent's emergence from the ocean's depths created whirlpools and tidal waves that threatened to capsize the boat, while its venomous breath created poisonous clouds that forced Thor to hold his breath during the struggle. The confrontation's most dramatic moment came when Thor raised Mjolnir to deliver the killing blow that would eliminate the serpent threat permanently. The hammer's arc through the air created lightning that illuminated the entire scene, while the thunder of its passage announced to all 9 worlds that a cosmic battle was reaching its climax. However, Hymir's terror at the sight of the serpent's massive head and Thor's obvious intention to kill it led the giant to cut the fishing line, allowing Jormungandr to sink back into the ocean's depths. Thor's fury at this interference manifested in his immediate decision to kill Hymir, whose cowardice had prevented the elimination of a major threat to cosmic order. The god's hammer blow, delivered with all his strength and enhanced by his magical belt, sent the giant's body flying across the ocean to crash into distant mountains. This violent response demonstrated Thor's intolerance for actions that undermined his protective mission, while establishing his willingness to kill even cooperative giants when their behavior threatened cosmic security. The serpent's escape ensured that this cosmic threat would persist until Ragnarok, when Thor and Jormungandr would meet in their final, mutually destructive battle. The fishing expedition's failure thus contributed to the accumulation of unresolved conflicts that would eventually culminate in the world's destruction and renewal. This outcome reflected the Norse understanding that even divine power faces limitations when confronting cosmic forces, and that some threats can only be delayed rather than permanently eliminated. Thor's numerous encounters with individual giants throughout his adventures demonstrated the variety of threats that these beings pose to cosmic order, and the different strategies required to defeat them. His battle with the giant Hrungnir, armed with a whetstone shield and spear, showcased Thor's ability to adapt his fighting style to opponents who possessed weapons and armor capable of withstanding Mjolnir's impact. The duel's outcome, with Thor's hammer shattering Hrungnir's whetstone weapon and killing the giant while leaving fragments embedded in Thor's own head, illustrated the mutual destruction that characterized many conflicts between gods and giants. The encounter with the giant Gerudur and his daughters presented Thor with a more complex challenge involving magical traps and supernatural hazards, rather than direct combat. The giant's invitation to visit his hall without bringing weapons represented an obvious trap that Thor accepted to demonstrate his courage and capability. The journey to Gerudur's stronghold, complicated by the giant's daughter's attempt to crush Thor by raising the roof of their fathers, required the god to use his strength and quick thinking to survive magical attacks that complemented physical threats. The final confrontation with Gerudur himself demonstrated Thor's ability to turn his enemies' weapons against them when conventional combat proved insufficient. The giant's attempt to kill Thor by hurling a red-hot iron bolt at him backfired when Thor caught the projectile with his iron gloves and hurled it back with such force that it pierced both Gerudur and the iron pillar behind him. This victory established Thor's reputation for resourcefulness and adaptability that complemented his more famous strength and courage. The god's popularity among common people across Scandinavia reflected his role as the most accessible and comprehensible deity in the Norse pantheon. Unlike Odin, whose complex motivations and shamanic practices remained largely mysterious to ordinary mortals, Thor's straightforward commitment to protecting civilization from chaotic forces made him an ideal patron for farmers, craftsmen, and other working people. His association with thunder and lightning, natural phenomena that directly affected agricultural success and daily life, established him as a deity whose influence could be observed and interpreted through weather patterns. The widespread use of Thor's name in Scandinavian place names demonstrates the geographical extent of his worship and the integration of his cult into local religious practices. Locations such as Rishavn in the Faroe Islands, Torshäll in Sweden, and numerous Thor's settlements across Norway and Iceland indicate communities that place themselves under Thor's protection. These place names often incorporated references to his hammer, his goats, or his role as thunder god, suggesting that different aspects of his character held particular significance for specific communities. Personal names incorporating Thor's name, such as Thorstein, Thorbjörn, and Thora, appear frequently in medieval Scandinavian sources and continue to influence modern naming practices. These names typically combine Thor's name with words indicating strength, protection, or divine favor, reflecting parents' hopes that their children would receive the god's protection and embody his positive characteristics. The persistence of these names through the Christian conversion period and into modern times demonstrates the enduring appeal of Thor's protective symbolism. The archaeological record preserves numerous Thor's hammer amulets from across the Viking world, with concentrations in Denmark, Sweden, and Iceland indicating the widespread nature of his cult. These miniature hammers, typically measuring between 1 and 3 centimeters in length, were crafted from silver, bronze, or iron, and often featured intricate decorative patterns that enhanced their protective properties. The amulet's distribution pattern, with higher concentrations in areas experiencing Christian conversion pressures, suggests their use as explicit symbols of pagan religious identity during periods of cultural transition. The hammer amulet's design variations reflect regional differences in artistic traditions and emphasis. Danish examples often feature elaborate knotwork patterns that demonstrate sophisticated metalworking skills, while Icelandic specimens tend towards simpler, more functional designs that emphasize the hammer's protective symbolism over decorative elements. The inclusion of runic inscriptions on some examples indicates the integration of Thor's protection with magical practices that enhanced the amulet's effectiveness. Thor's family relationships provided him with both sources of strength and potential vulnerabilities that influenced his actions throughout Norse mythology. His marriage to Sif, the goddess whose golden hair represented the fertility of grain fields, established him as a deity concerned with agricultural prosperity, as well as protection from hostile forces. Sif's association with the harvest season and her role in ensuring successful crop production complemented Thor's weather-controlling abilities, creating a divine partnership that addressed both the protective and productive aspects of agricultural life. The famous incident of Loki's theft of Sif's hair, which prompted Thor's threat to break every bone in the trickster's body, demonstrated the fierce protectiveness that characterized Thor's approach to family relationships. Loki's subsequent commission of replacement hair from the dwarven craftsman resulted in golden threads that surpassed the original in beauty and magical properties, while also producing several other magical items through the competitive crafting process. This episode established the pattern of crisis and resolution that characterized many interactions between Thor and Loki throughout their complex relationship. Thor's sons, Magni and Modi, whose names meant strength and courage, represented the continuation of his protective legacy into the post-Ragnarok world. These young gods, destined to survive the destruction that would claim their father, would inherit Mjolnir and continue Thor's role as protectors of the renewed world. Their survival of Ragnarok, along with a few other young gods, suggested that the essential functions of divine protection would persist even through cosmic destruction and renewal. The relationship between Thor and his father Odin reflected the complex dynamics between different approaches to divine authority and cosmic responsibility. While both gods shared a commitment to protecting cosmic order against chaotic forces, their methods and priorities often conflicted in ways that created tension within the divine hierarchy. Odin's subtle, long-term strategies that sometimes required sacrificing individual lives for strategic advantage contrasted sharply with Thor's direct, immediate responses to threats that prioritized protecting innocent victims over complex political calculations. This father-son dynamic played out most dramatically in situations where Odin's wisdom-seeking activities or political maneuvering conflicted with Thor's protective instincts. The All-Father's willingness to allow certain disasters to occur in order to gather information or test human character often frustrated Thor, whose immediate impulse was to intervene directly to prevent suffering. These disagreements reflected different aspects of divine responsibility and the challenges of maintaining cosmic order through both immediate protection and long-term strategic planning. Thor's role as the primary defender of Midgard established him as the god most directly concerned with human welfare and survival. His constant vigilance against giant incursions, his protection of travelers and farmers, and his intervention in natural disasters made him the most reliable source of divine assistance available to mortal communities. This protective function extended beyond simple military defense to encompass his role in ensuring favorable weather for agriculture, protecting livestock from predators and disease, and maintaining the natural boundaries that separated civilization from wilderness. The god's effectiveness as a protector derived not only from his tremendous strength and magical weapons, but also from his genuine concern for the welfare of ordinary people. Unlike other gods who might view mortals as useful tools or amusing diversions, Thor consistently demonstrated personal investment in human survival and prosperity. His willingness to share his food with hungry travelers, his protection of children and the elderly, and his swift punishment of those who threatened innocent people established him as a deity who truly cared about individual human lives, rather than simply maintaining abstract cosmic principles. Within the complex pantheon of Norse deities, no figure embodies contradiction and transformation more completely than Loki, the shape-shifting trickster whose actions consistently blur the boundaries between helper and destroyer, creator and annihilator. His dual nature as both problem-solver and problem-creator established him as the most unpredictable force within Asgard, capable of rescuing the gods from seemingly impossible situations, while simultaneously engineering the very crises that required divine intervention. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavian sites includes ambiguous symbols and artistic representations that may depict Loki, though his protean nature made consistent iconographic representation challenging for ancient craftsmen who preferred more stable divine imagery. Loki's origins as a giant son who became integrated into the Aesir through his blood brotherhood with Odin created a fundamental tension that influenced every aspect of his character and relationships. His father Farbodi, whose name meant cruel striker, represented the destructive aspects of lightning and wildfire, while his mother Lofi or Nal embodied the island or needle that provides the spark for conflagration. This genealogy established Loki as a being whose very existence bridged the gap between the ordered world of the gods and the chaotic realm of the giants, making him uniquely qualified to understand and manipulate both cosmic forces. The blood brotherhood between Loki and Odin, sworn in the distant past when both were younger and the cosmic order less established, created an unbreakable bond that persisted despite mounting evidence of Loki's increasingly destructive behavior. This relationship, described in the sources as involving the mingling of blood and sacred oaths that bound the participants closer than biological kinship, granted Loki a protected status within Asgard that enabled him to survive actions that would have resulted in immediate execution for any other being. The oath's terms, which required Odin to treat Loki as his own son and ensure his place at every feast and council, created a situation where the gods could neither fully trust nor completely reject their most problematic member. Loki's shape-shifting abilities represented perhaps his most distinctive characteristic, enabling him to assume forms ranging from insects and fish to birds and mammals, as well as transforming his gender at will to suit specific situations or personal inclinations. These transformations extended beyond simple physical alteration to encompass complete biological and psychological adaptation to his chosen form, allowing him to experience existence from radically different perspectives. His ability to maintain his essential consciousness while inhabiting alien forms demonstrated a mastery of identity manipulation that exceeded even Odin's shamanic shape-changing capabilities. The most famous example of Loki's gender transformation occurred during the construction of Asgard's protective wall, when he assumed the form of a mare to distract the giant builder's stallion Svadilfari. This transformation, initially undertaken to prevent the giant from completing his work and claiming Freya the sun and the moon as payment, resulted in Loki's pregnancy and the subsequent birth of Sleipnir, the eight-legged horse that became Odin's primary mount. The episode demonstrated Loki's willingness to undergo profound physical and psychological transformation to achieve necessary goals, while also revealing the unexpected consequences that could emerge from his interventions. The pregnancy itself represented a complete biological transformation that enabled Loki to experience gestation, labor, and childbirth from the perspective of a female horse. This experience, lasting the full 11 months of equine pregnancy, provided him with intimate knowledge of reproductive processes and maternal instincts that influenced his later relationships with his own offspring. The birth of Sleipnir, a being whose supernatural capabilities exceeded those of any normal horse, demonstrated how Loki's transformations could produce results that transcended the limitations of either parent's original nature. Loki's role as mother to various monstrous offspring established him as a creator of beings whose existence would ultimately threaten the cosmic order he had helped to establish. His relationship with the giantess Angrboda, whose name meant bringer of grief, produced 3 children whose destinies intertwined with the fate of the gods themselves. These offspring, conceived during Loki's travels in giant form through Jotunheim, represented different aspects of cosmic threat that would converge during Ragnarok to destroy the current world order. Fenrir, the wolf whose strength and size increased daily beyond all natural limits, embodied the growing threat of uncontrolled violence that could not be contained through conventional means. The wolf's intelligence, demonstrated through his ability to understand complex speech and evaluate the trustworthiness of potential captors, made him far more dangerous than a simple beast of enormous strength. His rapid growth, which soon exceeded the size of normal wolves and continued toward dimensions that threatened even the gods, created an escalating crisis that required increasingly desperate measures to address. The gods' initial attempts to control Fenrir through play and feeding created a false sense of security that enabled the wolf to grow comfortable within Asgard while continuing to increase in power. The young gods' games with Fenrir, which involved testing his strength against various restraints and challenges, provided the wolf with valuable information about divine capabilities and limitations, while allowing him to assess potential escape routes and defensive strategies. These interactions, initially viewed as harmless entertainment, gradually revealed the wolf's calculating intelligence and his growing contempt for the gods' attempts to control him. The decision to bind Fenrir with increasingly powerful chains reflected the gods' growing awareness that conventional solutions would prove inadequate against this supernatural threat. The first chain, Laedinga, snapped like a spider's web when Fenrir exerted his full strength, while the second Dromi lasted only slightly longer before breaking under the wolf's determined efforts. These failures demonstrated that normal materials and construction methods, even when enhanced with divine craftsmanship, could not contain a being whose power derived from cosmic forces rather than simple physical strength. The creation of Gleipnir, The magical chain that would ultimately bind Fenrir required the dwarven craftsmen to transcend normal material limitations by incorporating impossible elements into their construction. The chain's composition, including the sound of a cat's footstep, the breath of a fish, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, and the spittle of a bird, represented the transformation of abstract concepts into physical reality through advanced magical engineering. This achievement demonstrated the dwarves' ability to manipulate the fundamental forces of existence when provided with sufficient motivation and resources. The binding of Fenrir on the island of Lyngvi required elaborate deception to convince the increasingly suspicious wolf to submit to another test of strength. The god's presentation of Gleipnir as a simple silk ribbon that posed no threat masked its true nature as the most powerful restraint ever created. Fenrir's demand for a hostage, requiring one of the gods to place their hand in his mouth as a guarantee of good faith, created a situation where divine honor and cosmic necessity came into direct conflict. Tyr's decision to sacrifice his hand to enable Fenrir's binding represented the ultimate expression of divine duty overriding personal welfare. The god of war and justice, whose role as guarantor of oaths and legal agreements made him the most appropriate choice for this sacrifice, placed his right hand between Fenrir's jaws, knowing that the wolf's bite would permanently maim him. When Gleipnir proved unbreakable and Fenrir realized he had been deceived, his bite severed Tyr's hand at the wrist, creating a wound that would never heal and transforming the god into a permanent reminder of the price required to maintain cosmic order. The wolf's binding to the boulder jowl, secured with a chain jelgja and held in place by the swordgram thrust through his lower jaw into the ground, created a prison that would contain him until Ragnarok. The constant flow of saliva from his mouth, caused by the sword's position, formed the river van that carried away his pain and rage while preventing him from speaking or casting spells. This elaborate restraint system demonstrated the lengths to which the gods would go to contain threats they could not destroy, while ensuring that Fenrir's eventual escape would be accompanied by tremendous fury and desire for revenge. Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent whose coils encircled the entire world beneath the ocean's surface, represented a different type of cosmic threat that could not be contained through binding or imprisonment. The serpent's enormous size, achieved through continuous growth since his birth, enabled him to grasp his own tail and create a living barrier that surrounded Midgard completely. His position in the ocean depths, where he remained largely invisible to surface dwellers, made him a hidden threat whose true dimensions remained unknown to most inhabitants of the 9 worlds. The serpent's venomous nature posed a threat that extended beyond simple physical destruction to encompass the poisoning of the entire world's water supply. His breath, capable of creating toxic clouds that could kill even gods, represented a form of environmental destruction that would affect all living beings rather than simply those who encountered him directly. The serpent's ability to create earthquakes and tidal waves through his movements demonstrated his connection to geological forces that could reshape the landscape itself. Thor's fishing expedition to catch Jormungandr revealed the serpent's tremendous power and the mutual destruction that would characterize their final encounter. The god's success in lifting the serpent's head above the ocean surface, achieved through his supernatural strength and magical equipment, created a confrontation that threatened to destroy both participants and devastate the surrounding environment. The serpent's venomous breath, which forced Thor to retreat and prevented him from delivering the killing blow, foreshadowed their mutual destruction during Ragnarok, when both would die from their wounds. Hel, the third of Loki's monstrous offspring, ruled the realm of the dead with an authority that rivaled that of the gods themselves. Her appearance, described as half-living flesh and half-corpse, reflected her dominion over the boundary between life and death that made her uniquely qualified to govern those who had crossed from one state to the other. Her hall, El Judner, with its high walls and barred gates, served as both palace and prison for the countless dead who entered her domain through disease, old age, or other unheroic causes. Hel's power over the dead created a situation where even the gods required her permission to retrieve souls from her realm, as demonstrated during the attempt to rescue Balder from death. Her demand that all things in creation weep for Balder before she would release him established her authority as absolute within her domain, while her refusal to accept Loki's tears revealed her ability to perceive deception and maintain cosmic justice. This episode demonstrated how Loki's offspring had developed beyond his direct control to become independent forces, whose decisions could thwart even their father's schemes. The goddess's role as ruler of the dishonored dead created a realm where moral categories became blurred and traditional heroic values held little meaning. Her subjects, who had died through sickness, accident, or old age rather than in glorious battle, represented the majority of humanity, whose deaths lacked the dramatic significance that earned entrance to Valhalla. Her fair treatment of these souls, providing them with continued existence rather than punishment or reward, established her as a more merciful ruler than many of the gods who claimed moral superiority. Loki's relationship with his monstrous children reflected the complex dynamics between creator and creation that characterized his role in cosmic affairs. His initial affection for Fenrir, Humengandr, and Hel gradually transformed into a more complicated mixture of pride, concern, and strategic calculation as their power grew beyond his ability to control or direct. His awareness that their destinies intertwined with the destruction of the current cosmic order created a situation where his paternal instincts conflicted with his position within the divine hierarchy. The prophecies surrounding his children's roles in Ragnarok placed Loki in the impossible position of knowing that beings he had created would ultimately destroy the world he had helped to build and defend. This knowledge, combined with his growing alienation from the other gods, contributed to his increasing bitterness and willingness to work against the cosmic order he'd previously supported. The transformation of his children from beloved offspring into cosmic threats paralleled his own evolution from helpful trickster to active enemy of the gods. Loki's problem-solving abilities, demonstrated through numerous episodes where his quick thinking and unconventional approaches rescued the gods from seemingly impossible situations, established him as an invaluable resource whose contributions often overshadowed his troublemaking activities. His theft of the apples of youth from the giant Thjatsi, accomplished through shape-shifting and aerial maneuvering that enabled him to escape with the precious fruit, saved the gods from aging and death while demonstrating his willingness to risk his own life for the common good. The successful completion of this mission, despite the enormous dangers involved, proved his capability as an agent of divine will when properly motivated. The recovery of Thor's hammer from the giant Thrymr required Loki to devise and execute a complex deception that involved disguising Thor as a bride and himself as a bridesmaid to infiltrate the giant's wedding feast. This elaborate scheme, which required careful attention to detail and flawless performance under pressure, demonstrated Loki's theatrical abilities and his understanding of social conventions that could be manipulated to achieve strategic objectives. The successful retrieval of Mjolnir, accomplished through misdirection and timing rather than brute force, proved that some problems required subtlety and intelligence rather than direct confrontation. The construction of Asgard's wall presented Loki with perhaps his most complex challenge. requiring him to prevent the giant builder from completing his work while avoiding direct violation of the god's agreement. His transformation into a mayor to distract Svadilfari represented a solution that technically honored the contract's terms while ensuring its failure through indirect interference. The success of this strategy, which saved the gods from losing Freya, the sun and the moon, demonstrated Loki's ability to find loopholes and alternative approaches that others might overlook. However, Loki's problem-solving frequently created new difficulties that proved more serious than the original challenges he had addressed. His theft of Sif's hair, accomplished through a prank that seemed harmless at the time, nearly resulted in his death at Thor's hands and required extensive negotiations with dwarven craftsmen to resolve. The replacement hair, while superior to the original, came at the cost of commissioning magical items that would later play crucial roles in various divine crises and conflicts. The pattern of crisis creation followed by problem-solving that characterized Loki's career reflected his fundamental nature as a catalyst whose presence accelerated both positive and negative developments within the cosmic order. His interventions, whether helpful or harmful, consistently produced consequences that extended far beyond their immediate effects to influence the long-term trajectory of divine and mortal affairs. This catalytic function made him simultaneously indispensable and dangerous, as his ability to generate solutions came paired with his tendency to create new problems that required additional interventions. The death of Baldur marked the decisive turning point in Loki's relationship with the gods, transforming him from a problematic but ultimately loyal member of the divine community into an active enemy whose actions threatened the foundation of cosmic order. His role in engineering Baldur's death, accomplished through the manipulation of the blind god Hoda and the exploitation of the single weakness in the universal protection that surrounded the beloved deity, demonstrated a level of malice and calculation that exceeded his previous mischief-making activities. The gods' investigation into Baldur's death, which quickly identified Loki as the primary culprit, created a situation where his previous protected status as Odin's blood brother could no longer shield him from consequences. The evidence against him, including witness testimony and his own inability to provide convincing alternative explanations, established his guilt beyond reasonable doubt while revealing the premeditated nature of his actions. The discovery that he deliberately sought out the one substance capable of harming Baldur demonstrated that this was not a prank gone wrong, but a calculated assassination. Loki's flight from Asgard following the exposure of his guilt represented his acknowledgement that his position within the divine hierarchy had become untenable. His construction of a house with doors facing all four directions, designed to enable rapid escape in any direction, demonstrated his awareness that pursuit was inevitable and his preparation for a life as a fugitive. The house's location in the mountains, far from both divine and human settlements, reflected his transformation from a social being who thrived on interaction and attention into an isolated outcast whose survival depended on avoiding contact with others. The gods' pursuit of Loki, led by the combined efforts of all the major deities, demonstrated their commitment to bringing him to justice regardless of the resources required. Their systematic search of all possible hiding places, combined with their use of magical detection methods and divine surveillance capabilities, eventually located his mountain retreat and forced him to employ his shape-shifting abilities to avoid immediate capture. His transformation into a salmon, while temporarily effective in evading his pursuers, ultimately proved insufficient against the gods' determination and resourcefulness. The capture of Loki in salmon form, accomplished through the use of a net that he had ironically invented himself while in hiding, represented the ultimate triumph of divine justice over individual cunning. The net's design, which Loki had created to catch fish for food, provided the gods with the tool they needed to capture him in his aquatic form. This ironic reversal, where his own invention became the instrument of his capture, demonstrated the principle that actions inevitably produce consequences that return to affect their originators. The binding of Loki in the cave beneath the earth represented a punishment designed to match the severity of his crimes, while ensuring that he could not escape to cause further harm. The god's use of the entrails of his own son Vali, transformed into wolf form and killed by his brother Narfi, created bonds that carried both physical and emotional significance. The choice to use his children's remains as binding materials demonstrated the god's understanding that the most effective restraints combined physical impossibility with psychological torment. The positioning of the venomous serpent above Loki's form, arranged so that its poison would drip continuously onto his face, created a torture system designed to inflict maximum suffering while preventing him from escaping or casting spells. The serpent's venom, described as burning like acid and causing excruciating pain, ensured that Loki would remain conscious and aware of his punishment rather than escaping through unconsciousness or madness. The constant nature of this torture, with no periods of relief or respite, reflected the god's determination to make his suffering match the grief he had caused through Baldur's death. Seijen's loyalty to her husband, demonstrated through her decision to remain in the cave and catch the serpent's venom in a bowl to provide him with periodic relief, represented one of the most touching examples of marital devotion in Norse mythology. Her willingness to share his exile and punishment, despite having played no role in his crimes, established her as a figure of tragic nobility whose love transcended reasonable limits. Her position, kneeling beside Loki's bound form and holding the bowl steady to catch each drop of venom, required constant vigilance and physical endurance that matched his own suffering. The periodic emptying of the bowl, which occurred when it became full and Seijen had to turn away to pour out the accumulated venom, created moments of intense agony when the poison struck Loki's face directly. His convulsions during these episodes, described as violent enough to shake the earth and cause earthquakes, demonstrated the tremendous pain he experienced while providing a mythological explanation for seismic activity. The regularity of these episodes, determined by the capacity of the bowl and the rate of venom accumulation, created a rhythm of suffering that would continue until Ragnarok. The binding of Loki represented more than simple punishment for his role in Baldur's death. It symbolized the cosmic order's attempt to contain the forces of change and chaos that threatened its stability. His imprisonment removed the primary catalyst for transformation within the divine hierarchy, creating a period of apparent stability that masked the underlying tensions and contradictions that would eventually lead to Ragnarok. The gods' success in binding him demonstrated their power to impose consequences for actions that violated cosmic law, while the temporary nature of his imprisonment foreshadowed the eventual breakdown of all restraints and limitations. Loki's prophesied escape during Ragnarok, when the earthquakes caused by his suffering would eventually weaken his bond sufficiently to allow his freedom, established him as a force whose containment was temporary rather than permanent. His emergence from the cave, accompanied by his monstrous children and the assembled forces of chaos, would mark the beginning of the final battle that would destroy the current cosmic order. His transformation from bound prisoner to leader of the forces of destruction demonstrated the cyclical nature of cosmic change and the impossibility of permanently suppressing the forces that drive transformation and renewal. The cosmic order that had maintained stability across the 9 worlds began to fracture with a series of disturbing dreams that visited Baldur, the most beloved of the gods, whose radiant presence had long served as a beacon of hope and purity within Asgard. These prophetic visions, arriving night after night with increasing intensity and clarity, depicted his own violent death through injury so vivid and terrifying that they left the normally serene god trembling with dread upon awakening. The dreams showed various scenarios of his demise, each more disturbing than the last, featuring weapons piercing his flesh, flames consuming his body, and darkness swallowing his light, while the faces of his fellow gods twisted with grief and rage at his passing. The content of these nightmares proved so disturbing that Balder could no longer maintain his usual composure during the daily activities of divine life. His characteristic smile faded, replaced by a haunted expression that reflected the weight of foreknowledge pressing upon his consciousness. The god who had previously embodied joy and optimism now moved through Asgard's halls with the careful deliberation of one who saw death lurking in every shadow. His normally bright demeanor dimmed by the certainty that his time among the living was drawing to a close. When Balder finally shared these visions with the assembled gods, the reaction revealed the depth of affection and concern that his presence had inspired throughout the divine hierarchy. Odin's single eye blazed with paternal fury at the thought of losing his most perfect son, while Thor's massive hands clenched into fists as he contemplated the violence that would be necessary to protect his beloved brother. The goddesses wept openly at the prospect of losing the one being whose purity had elevated the moral tone of their entire community, while even the normally stoic Tyr showed signs of distress at the implications of these prophetic dreams. Frigg, driven by maternal desperation and her own prophetic abilities that confirmed the reality of the threat facing her son, embarked upon an unprecedented mission to secure divine protection through the extraction of binding oaths from every entity in creation. Her journey took her across all 9 worlds where she approached each category of being with the same urgent request: swear never to harm Balder, the most innocent and beloved of the gods. The comprehensiveness of her campaign reflected both her determination to save her son and her understanding that even the smallest oversight could prove fatal when dealing with prophetic visions of such clarity and persistence. The goddess began her oath-gathering mission with the most obvious sources of potential harm, approaching the various types of weapons that against her son. Swords, spears, axes, and arrows all swore solemn oaths never to cut or pierce Balder's flesh, their metal voices ringing with the sincerity of their promises. The weapons' willingness to bind themselves with such restrictions demonstrated the universal respect that Balder had earned through his consistent kindness and moral perfection, while their unanimous cooperation suggested that even inanimate objects recognized the cosmic significance of preserving his life. Fire and water, the elemental forces that had shaped the world's creation and continued to govern natural processes, also pledged their protection to Balder through oaths that bound their essential natures. Flame swore never to burn him, while water promised never to drown him, creating a supernatural immunity that extended beyond simple physical protection to encompass the fundamental forces of destruction and transformation. These elemental oaths required significant magical energy to establish and maintain, as they violated the natural order that subjected all beings to the same physical laws regardless of their moral character or divine status. The animal kingdom, from the mightiest predators to the smallest insects, joined in this unprecedented covenant of protection. Bears, wolves, and other dangerous creatures swore never to attack Balder with claw or fang, while venomous snakes and spiders promised never to poison him with their bites. Even domestic animals, whose interactions with gods typically involved service rather than violence, participated in the oath-taking ceremony that created a web of protection extending throughout the natural world. The participation of creatures both wild and tame demonstrated the universal appeal of Baldur's character and the recognition that his preservation served the interests of all living beings. Diseases and ailments, the invisible enemies that claimed more lives than warfare or accident, also submitted to Frigg's demands for protective oaths. Plague, fever, and wasting sickness swore never to touch Baldur's perfect form, while injuries and wounds promised never to mar his flawless appearance. These oaths against illness and injury created supernatural health that transcended normal divine resilience to establish Baldur as essentially invulnerable to all forms of harm that might befall other beings, whether mortal or divine. The mineral kingdom, including stones, metals, and gems, participated in the oath-taking ceremony that gradually transformed Baldur into the most protected being in existence. Rocks swore never to strike him, while metals promised never to cut or crush him, creating a comprehensive immunity that extended to both natural formations and crafted objects. The participation of these inanimate substances required magical intervention to grant them the consciousness necessary for oath-taking, demonstrating the extraordinary lengths to which Frigg was willing to go to ensure her son's safety. The thoroughness of Frigg's campaign created a situation where virtually every entity in creation had sworn binding oaths to protect Baldur from harm. The magical energy required to establish and maintain these countless oaths created a supernatural field of protection that surrounded the god wherever he went, deflecting potential sources of harm and ensuring that accidents that might injure others would leave him completely unscathed. This comprehensive protection system represented one of the most ambitious magical workings ever attempted, requiring the cooperation of beings across all categories of existence. However, Frigg's exhaustive campaign contained a single, seemingly insignificant oversight that would prove catastrophic in its consequences. The mistletoe, a small parasitic plant that grew on oak trees and appeared too insignificant to pose any threat to a powerful god, escaped her attention during the oath-gathering process. This plant, which seemed too young and harmless to warrant inclusion in the protective covenant, would become the instrument through which fate would circumvent even the most comprehensive magical protections ever devised. The mistletoe's exclusion from the protective oaths reflected a reasonable assessment of potential threats based on the plant's apparent characteristics. Unlike the mighty oak trees that hosted it, mistletoe appeared as a delicate, almost ethereal growth that seemed incapable of causing harm to even the most fragile mortal, much less a divine being of Baldur's power and resilience. Its soft leaves and small berries created an impression of harmlessness that made its inclusion in the oath-taking ceremony appear unnecessary and even somewhat ridiculous. The discovery of Baldur's invulnerability transformed the daily life of Asgard, as the gods developed a new form of entertainment based on testing the effectiveness of his supernatural protection. They would gather in the courtyard outside Gladsheim to hurl various objects at the smiling god, watching in amazement as weapons bounced harmlessly off his skin and stones crumbled to dust upon contact with his body. These demonstrations of his invulnerability became a source of wonder and celebration, as the gods marveled at the comprehensive nature of the protection that surrounded their most beloved member. The testing sessions revealed the remarkable extent of Baldur's immunity to harm, as even the most powerful weapons wielded by the strongest gods proved completely ineffective against his protected form. Thor's mighty hammer Mjolnir, capable of shattering mountains and killing giants, bounced off Baldur's chest like a child's toy, while Odin's spear Gungnir, which never missed its target, simply refused to penetrate his supernaturally protected skin. These demonstrations provided both entertainment and reassurance, as they confirmed that Frigg's protective magic had indeed rendered her son invulnerable to all conventional forms of harm. The gods' enjoyment of these invulnerability tests reflected their relief at having found a way to protect their most precious member from the prophetic dreams that had threatened his destruction. The laughter and celebration that accompanied each failed attempt to harm Balder created an atmosphere of joy and security that temporarily masked the underlying tensions and threats that continued to plague the cosmic order. The transformation of potential violence into harmless entertainment demonstrated the gods' ability to find positive applications for even the most serious magical workings. However, these celebrations of Baldur's invulnerability attracted the attention of Loki, whose complex relationship with the gods had grown increasingly strained as his actions became more destructive and his motivations more questionable. The trickster's exclusion from the joyful gatherings, whether through his own choice or the gods' reluctance to include him, created a sense of isolation and resentment that fed his growing hostility toward the divine community he had once served. His observation of the gods' happiness at Baldur's protection sparked a malicious curiosity about the specific mechanisms that had created this invulnerability. Loki's investigation into the source of Baldur's protection led him to approach Frigg directly, disguising himself as an elderly woman seeking information about the remarkable immunity that had become the talk of all 9 worlds. His shape-shifting abilities enabled him to present himself as a harmless gossip seeking to understand the magical working that had protected the beloved god, while his knowledge of social conventions allowed him to engage Frigg in conversation without arousing her suspicions. The disguise reflected his understanding that direct questioning would likely be rebuffed, while an indirect approach might yield the information he sought. The conversation between the disguised Loki and Frigg revealed the extent of the protective measures that had been implemented as the proud mother detailed the comprehensive nature of her oath-gathering campaign. Her description of the countless entities that had sworn to protect her son demonstrated both the thoroughness of her efforts and her confidence in the effectiveness of the magical protection she had established. The goddess's willingness to discuss these measures reflected her satisfaction with the successful completion of such an ambitious magical working and her belief that no significant threats remained. Frigg's casual mention of the mistletoe's exclusion from the protective oaths, dismissed as irrelevant due to the plant's apparent harmlessness, provided Loki with the crucial information he needed to circumvent the magical protections that had seemed impenetrable. Her explanation that the mistletoe had appeared too young and insignificant to warrant inclusion in the oath-taking ceremony revealed the single weakness in an otherwise perfect defensive system. The goddess's confidence that such a small and seemingly harmless plant could pose no threat to her powerful son demonstrated the reasonable but ultimately fatal assumption that had created this vulnerability. Armed with this knowledge, Loki immediately set out to locate and harvest mistletoe from the oak groves that surrounded Asgard. His search for the perfect specimen required careful examination of numerous plants as he sought mistletoe that had grown large enough to be fashioned into a weapon, while remaining small enough to escape notice during the oath-gathering process. The irony of seeking the most harmless-appearing plant to create the most deadly weapon was not lost on the trickster, whose appreciation for such contradictions reflected his fundamental nature as a being who thrived on paradox and reversal. The fashioning of the mistletoe dart required Loki to employ his considerable crafting skills to transform the soft plant material into a weapon capable of penetrating divine flesh. The process involved magical enhancement of the mistletoe's natural properties, concentrating its essence into a projectile that retained the plant's fundamental nature while gaining the hardness and sharpness necessary for use as a weapon. The resulting dart appeared innocuous to casual observation, resembling a simple twig or branch that might be used in children's games. rather than a weapon designed to kill a god. The completion of the mistletoe dart provided Loki with the means to circumvent Baldur's supernatural protection, but the successful use of this weapon required careful planning and execution to avoid detection and ensure the desired outcome. The trickster's understanding of the gods' personalities and relationships enabled him to identify the perfect unwitting accomplice for his assassination plot, Hodur, Baldur's blind brother, whose exclusion from the invulnerability testing sessions had created a sense of isolation and frustration that Loki could exploit for his own purposes. Hodur's blindness had prevented him from participating in the joyful gatherings where the gods tested Baldur's invulnerability, as his inability to see targets made it impossible for him to join in the throwing contests that had become a popular form of entertainment. This exclusion from the communal celebrations had created a sense of loneliness and inadequacy that made him vulnerable to Loki's manipulative suggestions. The blind god's genuine love for his brother, combined with his desire to participate in the activities that honored Baldur's protection, created the perfect psychological conditions for Loki's deception. Loki's approach to Hodur employed a carefully crafted combination of sympathy and encouragement designed to overcome the blind god's natural reluctance to participate in activities that might result in embarrassment or failure. The trickster presented himself as a helpful friend who understood Hodur's frustration at being excluded from the celebrations and offered to provide assistance that would enable his participation. This offer of help, framed as a gesture of friendship and inclusion, masked the deadly nature of Loki's true intentions while appealing to Hodur's desire to honor his beloved brother. The manipulation of Hodur required Loki to employ his most sophisticated psychological techniques, as the blind god's genuine goodness and love for Baldur made him naturally resistant to actions that might cause harm. The trickster's approach involved gradually building trust and confidence while presenting the proposed action as a harmless tribute to Baldur's invulnerability rather than a deadly attack. The careful framing of the dart-throwing act of honor and celebration rather than violence demonstrated Loki's understanding of how to exploit good intentions for evil purposes. The moment of Baldur's death arrived during one of the regular gatherings where the gods tested his invulnerability as Loki guided Hodur's hand to aim the mistletoe dart at his brother's heart. The blind god's throw, directed by Loki's careful guidance and enhanced by his genuine desire to participate in honoring his brother, sent the seemingly harmless projectile flying toward its target with deadly accuracy. The dart's flight through the air created no sound or disturbance that might have warned of its lethal nature, appearing to observers as simply another harmless object being thrown at the invulnerable god. The impact of the mistletoe dart upon Baldur's chest created a moment of stunned silence as the impossible occurred before the assembled god's eyes. The projectile, which should have bounced harmlessly off his protected skin like all the weapons that had preceded it, instead penetrated his flesh with devastating effect. The dart's passage through his heart created a wound that bypassed all the magical protections that had been established, striking down the most beloved of the gods with a weapon that appeared too insignificant to threaten even a mortal. Baldur's collapse and death created a scene of horror and disbelief that shattered the joyful atmosphere of the gathering and plunged Asgard into unprecedented grief. The god's body, which had moments before seemed invulnerable to all harm, now lay motionless on the ground with the small mistletoe dart protruding from his chest like a mockery of all the mighty weapons that had failed to harm him. The contrast between the weapon's humble appearance and its devastating effect created a visual representation of how the smallest oversight could lead to the most catastrophic consequences. The gods' initial reaction to Baldur's death combined shock, grief, and rage in proportions that reflected both their love for the fallen deity and their witnessing the impossible. Odin's single eye blazed with fury as he contemplated the loss of his most perfect son, while Thor's massive hands reached for Mjolnir as he sought enemies to punish for this unthinkable crime. The goddess's wails of grief echoed through Asgard's halls, creating a sound of lamentation that would be remembered as the moment when the cosmic order began its final collapse toward Ragnarok. The investigation into Baldur's death quickly identified Loki as the primary architect of the assassination, as his involvement in guiding Hod's throw had been witnessed by multiple gods who had initially assumed he was simply helping the blind deity participate in the celebrations. The revelation that the trickster had deliberately engineered the death of the most beloved god transformed the gathering from a scene of mourning into a manhunt as the assembled deities realized that they had been witness to a calculated murder rather than a tragic accident. Hodder's role as the unwitting instrument of his brother's death created a complex situation that tested the gods' understanding of justice and responsibility. The blind god's genuine ignorance of the dart's deadly nature, combined with his obvious grief at the unexpected outcome of his throw, established him as a victim of Loki's manipulation rather than willing participant in the assassination. However, his physical role in delivering the fatal blow created a legal and moral complexity that required careful consideration of intent versus action in determining appropriate consequences. The discovery of Loki's deception and his immediate flight from Asgard confirmed his guilt while demonstrating his awareness that his protected status as Odin's blood brother could no longer shield him from the consequences of his actions. The trickster's rapid departure from the scene of the crime, accomplished through his shape-shifting abilities and knowledge of hidden paths, prevented immediate capture while ensuring that his guilt would be forever associated with cowardice and betrayal. His transformation from problematic ally to active enemy was now complete, marking the point where the cosmic order's internal contradictions had finally produced open warfare between its own members. The gods' decision to pursue Baldur's rescue from Helheim reflected their refusal to accept that even death could permanently separate them from their most beloved member. This unprecedented mission to negotiate with Hel herself demonstrated the extraordinary lengths to which they were willing to go to undo the consequences of Loki's treachery. The selection of her mater, Odin's son, known for his courage and diplomatic skills, as the emissary for this dangerous journey, reflected the gods' understanding that success would require both bravery and wisdom in dealing with the ruler of the dead. Her mater's preparation for the journey to Helheim involved borrowing Sleipnir, the only horse capable of carrying a living rider into the realm of the dead and returning safely. The eight-legged steed's supernatural abilities enabled him to traverse the dangerous paths that led from Asgard to Hel's domain, while his experience with interdimensional travel ensured that the journey could be completed within the time constraints imposed by Baldur's continued presence in the land of the dead. The horse's willingness to undertake this perilous mission demonstrated the universal desire to see Baldur restored to life and the cosmic order returned to its previous stability. The journey to Helheim required her mater to traverse landscapes that grew progressively darker and more forbidding as he approached the realm of the dead. The path led through valleys shrouded in perpetual mist, across bridges that spanned bottomless chasms and past guardians whose duty was to prevent the living from entering the domain of the dead. Each stage of the journey tested both rider and horse as they navigated obstacles designed to turn back those who sought to violate the fundamental boundary between life and death. The crossing of the bridge, Jalabru, guarded by the maiden Modgudda, required her mater to explain his mission and demonstrate his legitimate right to enter Helheim, despite his living status. The bridge guardian's questioning revealed the unprecedented nature of his request, as no living being had previously sought entry to the realm of the dead for the purpose of negotiating a soul's release. The maiden's eventual permission to cross reflected her recognition of the extraordinary circumstances that had prompted this mission and her understanding that the cosmic order itself hung in the balance. The arrival at Hel's Hall, El Judnir, presented her mater with the challenge of negotiating with a ruler whose authority within her domain was absolute and whose decisions could not be overturned by force or trickery. The goddess's appearance, half-living flesh and half-decaying corpse, served as a constant reminder of the boundary between life and death that she governed. Her reception of the living messenger in her Hall of the Dead demonstrated her willingness to hear his petition while making clear that any agreement would be entirely on her terms. Her mater's presentation of his case for Baldur's release emphasized the universal love and respect that the god had earned throughout his life, as well as the cosmic significance of his continued existence for maintaining order and stability. The messenger's description of the grief that had consumed Asgard following Baldur's death, combined with his explanation of the circumstances that had led to the assassination, created a compelling argument for the goddess's intervention. The plea for mercy and justice appealed to Hel's role as a fair ruler who considered the merits of each case, rather than simply applying inflexible rules. Hel's response to her mater's petition revealed both her power and her wisdom, as she proposed a test that would demonstrate the universal nature of the love that supposedly surrounded Baldur. Her condition that all things in creation must weep for the dead god before she would release him created a challenge that paralleled Frigg's earlier oath-gathering campaign while testing whether the affection for Baldur was as comprehensive as claimed. The goddess's requirement that every entity participate in this demonstration of grief established a standard that would prove whether the dead god's value to the cosmic order justified overturning the natural boundary between life and death. The return journey to Asgard with Hel's conditional offer of Baldur's release created a race against time, as the gods mobilized every available resource to ensure that all things in creation would weep for their beloved member. The campaign to generate universal grief required even more extensive efforts than Frigg's original oath-gathering mission, as it involved reaching every entity that had previously sworn to protect Baldur and convincing them to demonstrate their sorrow at his death. The comprehensiveness of this effort reflected the gods' determination to meet Hel's conditions and secure Baldur's return to life. The Jotnar represented far more than simple antagonists in the cosmic drama of Norse mythology. They embodied the primordial forces of chaos and untamed nature that existed before the establishment of divine order and would persist long after its destruction. These ancient beings, whose very existence predated the creation of the ordered cosmos, possessed intimate knowledge of the fundamental forces that shaped reality itself. Their enormous size, often described as mountain-like in proportions, reflected their connection to the geological and meteorological phenomena that could reshape landscapes and devastate civilizations in moments. The giants' dwellings in Jotunheim, characterized by vast halls carved from living rock and fortresses that merged seamlessly with mountain ranges, demonstrated their mastery over the raw materials of creation that the gods had organized into the structured world of Midgard. Archaeological evidence from across Scandinavia preserves traces of giant lore in the form of massive stone formations that local traditions attributed to giant construction or giant battles. The dolmens and stone circles found throughout Denmark and southern Sweden were often explained as the remains of giant dwellings, or the weapons hurled during their conflicts with the gods. These interpretations reflected a deep cultural understanding that the landscape itself bore witness to cosmic struggles between order and chaos, with natural formations serving as permanent reminders of the titanic forces that had shaped the world's current configuration. Utgard Loki, the master of illusions who ruled the giants' primary stronghold, represented the most sophisticated expression of giant cunning and magical knowledge. His fortress Utgard, described as so enormous that visitors had to squeeze between the iron bars of its gates to enter, served as a testing ground where the fundamental assumptions about strength, speed, and capability could be challenged and overturned through supernatural deception. The giant king's ability to manipulate reality itself, creating illusions so comprehensive that even Thor's divine senses could not penetrate them, demonstrated the giant's mastery of magical arts that rivaled or exceeded those of the gods themselves. The contests arranged by Utgard Loki for Thor and his companions revealed the giant's understanding that direct confrontation with divine power required alternative strategies based on misdirection and the exploitation of cosmic forces beyond individual control. Thor's drinking contest against what appeared to be a simple horn, but which was secretly connected to the ocean itself, demonstrated how giant magic could transform apparently simple challenges into tests against the fundamental forces of nature. The gods' tremendous drinking capacity, sufficient to drain entire lakes, could only slightly lower the sea level when pitted against the infinite waters that surrounded Midgard. The eating contest between Loki and the giant Logi, whose name meant flame, illustrated the giant's ability to embody abstract forces in physical form. Loki's victory in consuming not only the meat, but also the bones and the wooden trencher itself revealed his true nature as fire personified, a force that could devour all material substances regardless of their composition or origin. This contest demonstrated the giant's fundamental difference from both gods and mortals, as they represented elemental processes rather than individual personalities with consistent motivations and limitations. Thor's wrestling match with the elderly giantess Eli provided perhaps the most profound lesson about the limitations of even divine power when confronted with cosmic inevitabilities. The old woman's gradual forcing of the thunder god to one knee revealed her true identity as old age itself, a force that affected all beings regardless of their strength or divine status. This defeat taught Thor that some aspects of existence transcended physical prowess and could not be overcome through the application of force, no matter how tremendous that force might be. The revelation of these deceptions, disclosed by Utgard or Logi after the contest concluded, demonstrated the giants' sophisticated understanding of psychological warfare and their ability to achieve strategic victories through means that avoided direct confrontation with superior force. The giant king's explanation that Skruma had been himself in disguise, protected by invisible mountains that absorbed Thor's hammer blows, revealed the complex magical preparations required to survive encounters with divine wrath. The food bag sealed with magical iron wire, and the sleeping giant's positioning of mountains to intercept Mjolnir's strikes showed how giant magic operated through environmental manipulation rather than personal enhancement. Hrymr, the giant who stole Thor's hammer and demanded Freya as ransom for its return, represented a different aspect of giant behavior that emphasized their desire to acquire the symbols and sources of divine power. His theft of Mjolnir while Thor slept demonstrated the giants' opportunistic nature and their understanding that even the gods' most powerful weapons could be vulnerable during moments of inattention. The giant's demand for Freya as payment revealed his awareness that the goddess' fertility magic and her knowledge of Seta represented power that could significantly enhance giant capabilities in their ongoing conflict with the divine order. The wedding feast arranged to facilitate Mjolnir's return provided Hrymr with an opportunity to demonstrate giant hospitality, while simultaneously humiliating the gods through the forced disguise of Thor as a bride. The giants' preparations for the ceremony, including the slaughter of numerous cattle and the brewing of vast quantities of mead showed how giant society could match divine standards of luxury and celebration when circumstances warranted such displays. The feast's elaborate nature also demonstrated the giants' understanding of ritual and ceremony as tools for legitimizing power transfers and binding agreements. The personification of natural phenomena within giant society created beings whose individual characteristics reflected the specific forces they embodied. Aegir, the giant who ruled the ocean's depths, possessed the ability to brew ale in enormous cauldrons that could provide drink for all the gods simultaneously. His hall beneath the waves, illuminated by the gleam of gold rather than fire, demonstrated how giant architecture adapted to environmental conditions that would be impossible for other beings to inhabit. The giant's role as host to divine feasts, despite his fundamental opposition to the cosmic order they maintained, illustrated the complex relationships that could exist between opposing forces. Ran, Aegir's wife, wielded a magical net that could capture the souls of those who drowned in her husband's domain. Her collection of the sea dead created an underwater realm that paralleled Hell's domain while serving different cosmic functions. The drowned warriors in Rant's net retained their martial capabilities and could be called upon to serve in aquatic battles, creating an underwater army that could threaten both divine and mortal shipping. Her 9 daughters, the wave maidens who were said to be the mothers of Heimdall, demonstrated how giant bloodlines could produce beings whose loyalties transcended the traditional boundaries between cosmic factions. Jord, the earth goddess whose relationship with Odin produced Thor, represented the intimate connections that could exist between giant and divine natures. Her embodiment of the earth's fertility and stability provided the foundation upon which all terrestrial life depended, while her maternal relationship with the thunder god created a divine being whose protective instincts extended to both gods and mortals. This union demonstrated how the greater potential of giant divine relationships could produce offspring whose capabilities exceeded those of either parent. The frost giants of Niflheim represented the destructive potential of extreme cold and the entropic forces that sought to return the cosmos to its primordial state of frozen emptiness. These beings, whose breath could freeze rivers and whose touch could kill vegetation instantly, embodied the seasonal cycles that brought death to the natural world each winter. Their conflicts with the gods often centered around their attempts to extend winter's duration and expand the boundaries of the frozen realms at the expense of areas suitable for agriculture and human habitation. The fire giants of Muspelheim, led by Surtur with his flaming sword, represented the opposing extreme of destructive heat that would ultimately consume the current world order during Ragnarok. These beings existed in a realm of perpetual flame where normal matter could not survive, requiring them to develop forms of existence that transcended material limitations. Their prophesied role in the final battle, riding across Bifrost to set the world ablaze, established them as agents of cosmic renewal rather than simple destroyers, as their fires would clear away the corruption of the current age to enable the birth of a new and better world. The dwarves, emerging from the maggots that fed on Ymir's corpse, underwent a transformation from creatures of decay into master craftsmen, whose skills surpassed even divine capabilities in certain specialized areas. Their underground workshops, carved into the living rock of mountains and heated by volcanic fires, contained forges capable of working with materials that existed nowhere else in the 9 worlds. The dwarves' ability to manipulate the fundamental forces of creation through their craftsmanship made them indispensable allies whose services the gods required, despite their often problematic personalities and demands for dangerous payments. The creation of Mjolnir by the dwarven brothers Brokkr and Atri demonstrated the pinnacle of dwarven craftsmanship and their ability to imbue inanimate objects with supernatural properties that exceeded the sum of their component materials. The hammer's forging required the brothers to work with metals that existed only in the heart of stars, combined with magical elements that could only be obtained through dangerous expeditions to the boundaries of reality itself. The weapon's distinctive short handle, resulting from Loki's interference during its creation, paradoxically enhanced its effectiveness by enabling Thor to wield it with devastating speed and accuracy. The crafting process for divine weapons required dwarven artisans to transcend normal material limitations through techniques that bordered on the creation of new forms of matter. Gungnir, Odin's spear that never missed its target, incorporated wood from Yggdrasil itself combined with iron that had been tempered in the fires of creation. The weapon's supernatural accuracy derived from its connection to the world tree's all-encompassing awareness, enabling it to perceive the location of any target regardless of distance or concealment. The spear's ability to bind oaths and compel truth-telling made it an essential tool for divine governance and the maintenance of cosmic justice. The golden hair created for Sif after Loki's theft of her original locks demonstrated the dwarves' ability to improve upon natural beauty's supernatural craftsmanship. The replacement hair, spun from the finest gold and imbued with magical properties that made it more lustrous and resilient than any natural growth, actually enhanced the goddess' appearance beyond its original state. The hair's supernatural nature enabled it to grow and move like living tissue while maintaining the imperishable beauty of precious metal, creating an improvement that transformed Loki's destructive prank into an unexpected enhancement. Skidbladnir, the ship crafted for Freyr by the sons of Ivaldi, represented the dwarves' mastery of engineering principles that enabled them to create vessels capable of traveling through any medium. The ship's ability to sail through air and water with equal ease, combined with its capacity to be folded up and carried in a pocket when not in use, demonstrated dwarven understanding of spatial manipulation that exceeded normal physical laws. The vessel's supernatural properties included the ability to always find favorable winds and to accommodate any number of passengers while maintaining optimal sailing characteristics. The creation of Gleipnir, the magical chain that bound Fenrir, required the dwarves to work with materials that existed more as concepts than physical substances. The chain's composition, including the sound of a cat's footstep and the breath of a fish, forced the craftsmen to develop techniques for transforming abstract ideas into tangible restraints. This achievement represented the ultimate expression of dwarven magical engineering, as they succeeded in creating a physical object from impossible materials that could contain a supernatural threat that conventional weapons and restraints could not hold. The dwarves' underground society operated according to principles that emphasized individual skill and craftsmanship over the hierarchical structures that characterized divine and human communities. Their workshops, each designed to maximize the efficiency of specific crafting processes, reflected a culture that valued technical excellence above social status or political power. The competition between different dwarven craftsmen, often resulting in the creation of multiple versions of similar items with varying properties, drove continuous innovation and improvement in their techniques. The payment demanded by dwarven craftsmen for their services often included elements that seemed disproportionate to the value of the work performed, reflecting their understanding that their unique skills gave them leverage in negotiations with even the most powerful customers. Their willingness to accept dangerous or seemingly impossible payments, such as the gods' lives or essential body parts, demonstrated their confidence in their ability to protect themselves through magical means and their understanding that truly exceptional work deserved exceptional compensation. The Light Elves of Alfheim represented the beneficent aspects of supernatural beings whose existence enhanced rather than threatened the cosmic order. These luminous creatures, described as fairer than the sun and more beautiful than any mortal could imagine, served as intermediaries between the divine and human realms. Their association with Freyr's rulership connected them to the fertility functions that sustained agricultural prosperity, while their ethereal nature enabled them to influence human affairs through subtle interventions that promoted harmony and growth. The Light Elves' ability to inspire creativity and artistic achievement in mortals made them popular subjects for invocation by poets, craftsmen, and other creative individuals seeking divine assistance with their work. Their influence operated through dreams and sudden insights rather than direct intervention, enabling humans to achieve levels of artistic excellence that exceeded their normal capabilities while maintaining the essential human character of the work. This form of supernatural assistance respected human agency while providing the inspiration necessary for transcendent achievement. The distinction between light and dark elves reflected the Norse understanding that supernatural beings existed along a spectrum of moral alignment rather than in simple categories of good and evil. The Light Elves' association with beneficial magic and natural beauty contrasted with the Dark Elves' connection to underground crafting and potentially harmful magical practices. However, both groups possess the capacity for either helpful or harmful actions depending on their relationships with specific humans and the circumstances of their interactions. The Dark Elves, often conflated with the dwarves in later sources, possessed magical knowledge that complemented their crafting skills and enabled them to influence events in the upper worlds through supernatural means. Their understanding of runic magic, herb lore, and enchantment made them valuable allies for humans seeking magical assistance, though their services typically came with prices that reflected the dangerous nature of the knowledge they possessed. The Dark Elves' willingness to teach magical techniques to worthy students created opportunities for humans to develop supernatural capabilities that could rival those of lesser gods. The Norns, three sisters who controlled the fate of gods and mortals alike, represented the ultimate expression of supernatural authority that transcended even divine power. Ord, Verdandi, and Skuld, whose names meant past, present, and future, wove the threads of destiny at the base of Yggdrasil with an authority that could not be challenged or overturned by any other force in the cosmos. Their daily task of sprinkling the world tree with water from the well of Ord maintained the cosmic order while simultaneously determining the fate of every being in existence. The Norns' appearance varied according to different sources, but they were consistently described as possessing an otherworldly beauty combined with an aura of inexorable authority that made even the gods approach them with respectful caution. Their weaving of fate operated through the manipulation of threads that represented individual lives and destinies, with the length, color, and texture of each thread determining the specific characteristics and duration of each existence. The complexity of their work, involving the coordination of countless individual fates into coherent patterns that maintained cosmic stability, demonstrated their mastery of forces that operated beyond normal comprehension. The sisters' individual roles reflected different aspects of temporal authority and the relationship between past actions and future consequences. Ord's focus on past events and their continuing influence on the present circumstances established her as the guardian of cosmic memory and the enforcer of consequences for previous actions. Verdandi's attention to present moments and immediate decisions made her the arbiter of current opportunities and the guide for beings seeking to understand their immediate options. Skald's knowledge of future possibilities and her role in determining which potential outcomes would become reality established her as the ultimate authority over destiny itself. The Valkyries, Odin's warrior maidens who selected the heroic dead for service in Valhalla, represented a specialized category of supernatural beings whose existence bridged the gap between divine authority and mortal warfare. These formidable women, typically described as tall and beautiful, with flowing hair and gleaming armor, possessed the ability to influence the outcome of battles while maintaining their primary function as recruiters for Odin's army of the dead. Their supernatural horses, capable of flying through air and traveling between worlds, enabled them to appear on any battlefield where worthy warriors might be found. The Valkyries' selection criteria for determining which fallen warriors would join the Einherjar reflected Odin's strategic thinking about the requirements for fighting in the final battle at Ragnarok. Their evaluation process considered not only combat skill and courage, but also loyalty, intelligence, and the psychological resilience necessary for supernatural warfare. The chosen warriors underwent transformation from mortal fighters into divine soldiers whose daily routine of combat, death, and resurrection prepared them for battles that would determine the fate of the cosmos itself. Individual Valkyries possessed distinct personalities and areas of expertise that reflected their specialized roles within Odin's military organization. Brynhild's association with wisdom and prophecy made her particularly valuable for strategic planning and the evaluation of long-term consequences, while other Valkyries specialized in specific types of combat or the recruitment of particular categories of warriors. Their relationships with mortal heroes, sometimes involving romantic attachments that created conflicts between duty and personal desire, demonstrated the complex emotional lives that characterized these supernatural beings. The various spirits that inhabited the Norse understanding of the natural world created a complex ecosystem of supernatural beings whose influences affected every aspect of daily life. House spirits, field spirits, and forest spirits each possessed specific areas of authority and particular requirements for maintaining harmonious relationships with human communities. These beings, typically invisible to normal sight but capable of making their presence known through various signs and interventions, required regular offerings and respectful treatment to ensure their continued cooperation with human activities. The Landvader or land spirits possessed territorial authority over specific geographical areas and could either assist or hinder human settlement and agricultural activities depending on their treatment by the local population. These spirits, often associated with prominent landscape features such as mountains, rivers, or ancient trees, required acknowledgement of their prior claims to the land and regular offerings to maintain their goodwill. Their ability to influence weather patterns, crop yields, and the health of livestock made them essential allies for successful farming communities. Water spirits, including the Fossagrim who inhabited waterfalls and the Nakin who dwelt in lakes and rivers, possessed magical knowledge that could be shared with humans who approached them with proper respect and appropriate offerings. These beings often served as guardians of specific bodies of water, while also functioning as teachers of music, magic, and other supernatural arts. Their willingness to share their knowledge depended on the character and intentions of those who sought their instruction, with unworthy students facing potentially deadly consequences for their presumption. The cosmic order that had maintained its precarious balance for countless ages began to unravel through a series of ominous signs that even the gods could not ignore or prevent. The first and most devastating of these portents manifested as the Fimbulwinter, a supernatural winter that would last for 3 full years without the relief of summer's warmth. This was no ordinary seasonal cold, but a cosmic phenomenon that brought temperatures so severe that the very air seemed to crystallize, and snow fell continuously from skis that had turned the color of old iron. The sun, already weakened by the wolves, Skull and Hattie's relentless pursuit, provided no warmth during its brief appearances above the horizon, casting only a pale, sickly light that did nothing to melt the ever-deepening drifts of snow and ice. The Fimbulwinter's impact extended far beyond simple meteorological extremes to encompass the complete breakdown of agricultural systems that had sustained human civilization since its inception. Crops failed entirely during the first year, their seeds freezing in the ground before they could germinate, while livestock died in massive numbers despite every effort to shelter them from the supernatural cold. The rivers and lakes froze to depths that prevented fishing, while the seas became choked with ice that made maritime travel impossible. Forests died as the sap in their trunks froze and expanded, splitting ancient trees with sounds like thunder that echoed across the desolate landscape. Starvation became widespread as stored food supplies dwindled, and no new sources of nourishment could be found or produced. Human communities that had thrived for generations found themselves reduced to scavenging for bark, roots, and any organic matter that might provide minimal sustenance. The desperate search for food led to the breakdown of social bonds that had previously held communities together, as families turned against each other in their struggle to survive. Parents abandoned children they could no longer feed, while children left elderly relatives to die in the cold rather than share their meager resources. The moral decay that accompanied the physical hardships of the Fimbulwinter manifested in the complete abandonment of the ethical codes had previously governed human behavior. Sacred oaths were broken without hesitation when keeping them might mean death, while hospitality laws that had protected travelers for centuries were discarded as communities closed their doors to strangers who might consume precious resources. The concept of honor, which had formed the backbone of Norse society, became meaningless when survival required actions that would have been unthinkable in better times. Brother turned against brother as family bonds dissolved under the pressure of competition for scarce resources. The kinship ties that had traditionally provided security and mutual support became sources of conflict as relatives fought over inheritance, food stores, and shelter. Sons killed fathers to claim their property, while brothers murdered each other over disputes that would have been resolved peacefully in normal circumstances. The breakdown of relationships created a society where trust became impossible and violence was the only reliable means of resolving conflicts. The collapse of legal and social institutions accelerated as the authorities who had previously maintained order found themselves powerless to enforce laws that had become irrelevant to survival. Kings and jarls, who had once commanded absolute loyalty, discovered that their subjects would no longer obey orders that conflicted with their immediate need to find food and shelter. The Thing assemblies that had traditionally resolved disputes through negotiation and legal precedent ceased to function as communities fragmented into small groups focused solely on their own survival. Religious observances, which had provided comfort and meaning during previous hardships, were abandoned as people lost faith in gods who seemed unable or unwilling to end their suffering. Temples were stripped of their valuable offerings as desperate communities sought anything that might be traded for food, while sacred groves were cut down for firewood without regard for their spiritual significance. The priests and vulvars who had served as intermediaries between the human and divine realms found their authority questioned and their prophecies dismissed by people who had lost hope in supernatural intervention. The breakdown of trade networks that had connected distant communities created isolated pockets of humanity struggling to survive without the resources and knowledge that had previously been shared across vast distances. The roads that had facilitated commerce became dangerous paths haunted by bandits and desperate refugees, while the ships that had carried goods between settlements lay frozen in harbors that had become solid ice. The loss of trade meant that communities could no longer obtain essential materials, like iron for tools and weapons, salt for preserving food, or medicines for treating the diseases that flourished in the harsh conditions. Warfare erupted between communities as groups fought for control of the few remaining resources that might enable survival through the endless winter. These conflicts lacked the honor and ritual that had characterized traditional Norse warfare, degenerating into brutal struggles where any tactic that might provide advantage was considered acceptable. Entire settlements were destroyed not for conquest or glory, but simply to eliminate competition for scarce resources. The warriors who had once fought according to codes of honor now employed poison, treachery, and the targeting of non-combatants as standard tactics. The psychological impact of the Fimbulwinter proved as devastating as its physical effects, as the constant cold and darkness created a pervasive despair that sapped the will to continue struggling for survival. The absence of sunlight for months at a time led to a form of madness that manifested in increased violence, irrational behavior, and a complete loss of hope for the future. People who had previously been known for their courage and resilience found themselves paralyzed by depression and unable to take the actions necessary for their own survival. Children born during the Fimbulwinter grew up knowing only cold hunger and violence, creating a generation whose understanding of normal human relationships was fundamentally distorted. These young people, raised in an environment where compassion was a few could afford, developed into adults whose capacity for empathy and cooperation had been permanently damaged by their early experiences. Their inability to form the social bonds necessary for rebuilding civilization ensured that the moral decay initiated by the Fimbulwinter would persist even if the physical hardships eventually ended. The natural world seemed to rebel against the cosmic order as animals abandoned their normal behaviors and turned savage in their desperation to survive. Domesticated creatures that had lived peacefully alongside humans for generations became feral and dangerous, attacking their former caretakers without provocation. Wild animals that had traditionally avoided human settlements began raiding communities in organized groups, displaying an intelligence and coordination that suggested supernatural influence in their behavior. Even the landscape appeared to change as the supernatural winter progressed, with familiar landmarks disappearing under snowdrifts and new geographical features appearing as the weight of ice reshaped valleys and hillsides. Rivers changed their courses as ice dams created new lakes and flooded previously dry areas, while mountains seemed to shift position as avalanches and ice movements altered their profiles. The transformation of the physical environment created a world that survivors no longer recognized, adding to their sense of displacement and hopelessness. The gods themselves began to show signs of the strain imposed by the cosmic crisis, as their efforts to maintain order against the forces of chaos required increasingly desperate measures. Odin's ravens returned each day with reports of spreading destruction and moral collapse that confirmed the All-Father's worst fears about the approaching end of the current age. The Einherjar in Valhalla intensified their training as the proximity of Ragnarok became undeniable, but even their supernatural dedication could not entirely mask their growing anxiety about the battles to come. Thor's hammer rang more frequently across the skies as the thunder god fought an increasing number of giant incursions into Midgard, but his victories provided only temporary relief from threats that seemed to multiply faster than they could be defeated. The protective barriers that had traditionally separated the ordered world from the realms of chaos began to weaken under the constant pressure, allowing hostile forces to penetrate deeper into areas that had previously been secure. The Rainbow Bridge Bifrost showed signs of strain as increased traffic between the worlds tested its structural integrity. Freya's attempts to use her fertility magic to counteract the Fimbulwinter proved ineffective against forces that operated on a cosmic scale beyond the reach of individual intervention. The goddess's usual ability to ensure agricultural prosperity and animal fertility found no purchase against a supernatural winter that had been designed to destroy rather than merely challenge the natural order. Her growing frustration at her inability to help the suffering mortals reflected the limitations that even divine power faced when confronting the fundamental forces of cosmic destruction. The binding of Loki in his underground cave began to weaken as the earthquakes caused by his agonized convulsions increased in frequency and intensity. The magical chains that held him, while still strong enough to prevent his immediate escape, showed signs of wear that suggested his eventual freedom was inevitable rather than merely possible. The serpent's venom continued to drip onto his face, but his growing rage at his imprisonment and his desire for revenge against the gods who had bound him provided him with strength that gradually overcame even the most powerful restraints. Seijen's vigil beside her bound husband became increasingly difficult as the cave's environment grew more hostile and the earthquakes more violent. The loyal wife's dedication to catching the serpent's venom in her bowl provided Loki with periods of relief that enabled him to conserve his strength for the final effort that would break his bonds. Her presence also served as a constant reminder of the injustices he had suffered, feeding his anger and determination to survive long enough to claim his revenge against those who had destroyed his family and condemned him to eternal torment. The weakening of Fenrir's bonds on the island of Lyngvi became apparent as the magical chain began to show signs of stress from the wolf's continued growth and increasing strength. The impossible materials that had been used in the chain's construction maintained their supernatural properties, but the wolf's own supernatural nature enabled him to gradually overcome even these magical restraints. His intelligence, which had grown along with his physical power, allowed him to identify the weak points in his prison and focus his efforts on the areas most likely to yield to persistent pressure. The wolf's hatred for the gods who had deceived and bound him provided him with motivation that transcended mere physical strength, as his desire for revenge gave him the psychological endurance necessary to maintain his escape efforts over the years of his imprisonment. His memory of Tyr's sacrifice, which had enabled his binding, created a particular focus for his rage that promised terrible consequences for the god of war when their final confrontation arrived. The wolf's growing awareness that his escape would coincide with the end of the current cosmic order filled him with anticipation for the destruction he would help to bring about. Jormungandr's movements in the ocean depths created increasingly violent storms and tidal waves that devastated coastal communities already struggling with the effects of the Fimbulwinter. The serpent's growing agitation, caused by his awareness of the approaching final battle, led him to thrash against the ocean floor with such violence that underwater earthquakes became common occurrences. His venomous breath began to poison larger areas of the sea, killing fish and marine life in massive numbers that further reduced the food sources available to struggling human populations. The serpent's tail, which he had grasped in his mouth to encircle Midgard completely, began to loosen as his movements became more violent, and his attention focused on the coming confrontation with Thor. This loosening of his grip created gaps in the living barrier that had surrounded the human world, allowing chaotic forces from the outer ocean to penetrate into areas that had previously been protected. The breakdown of this natural boundary marked another step in the dissolution of the cosmic order that had maintained stability since the world's creation. Hel's realm experienced unprecedented activity as the death toll from the Thimble Winter overwhelmed the usual processes for managing the deceased. The goddess of the dead found her domain flooded with souls who had died from starvation, cold, and violence, creating administrative challenges that strained even her supernatural capabilities. The traditional segregation of the dead according to the manner of their deaths became impossible to maintain as the sheer numbers of new arrivals exceeded the capacity of the existing organizational systems. The increased population of the dead created opportunities for Hel to build an army that could rival the Einherjar in Valhalla, as the angry spirits of those who had died unjustly during the Thimble Winter provided her with motivated recruits for the coming battle. These souls, filled with resentment at the gods' failure to protect them and bitter about the circumstances of their deaths, proved eager to join any force that promised revenge against the cosmic order that had failed them. The numbers grew daily as the death toll from the supernatural winter continued to mount. The ship Naglfar, constructed from the fingernails and toenails of the dead, began to take shape in Hel's realm, as the increased mortality provided abundant building materials for this vessel of doom. The ship's construction represented a collaborative effort between the forces of chaos as giants, monsters, and the dishonored dead worked together to create a vessel capable of carrying an army to the final battle. The ship's supernatural properties, derived from its gruesome construction materials, enabled it to sail through any medium and carry unlimited numbers of passengers without affecting its speed or maneuverability. The barriers between the 9 worlds began to weaken as the cosmic order lost its ability to maintain the separations that had previously kept hostile forces confined to their appropriate realms. Giants found it easier to travel between Jotunheim and other worlds, while monsters and chaotic entities began appearing in locations where they had never been seen before. The breakdown of these boundaries created a cascade effect where each successful penetration made subsequent breaches easier to achieve and harder to repair. Heimdall's watch from his position on Bifrost became increasingly difficult as the number of threats requiring his attention multiplied beyond his ability to track them all simultaneously. The Guardian of the Rainbow Bridge found himself forced to choose which incursions to report and which to handle personally, as his supernatural senses were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of hostile activity occurring across all the worlds. His horn Gyllerhorn, which would signal the beginning of Ragnarok, remained ready for the moment when the final crisis would begin. The fire giants of Muspelheim began their preparations for the final assault as Surtur sharpened his flaming sword and gathered his forces for the march that would end the current age. The realm of fire experienced increased activity as weapons were forged and strategies developed for the coming battle, while the sons of Muspel prepared for their prophesied ride across Bifrost that would break the Rainbow Bridge and signal the beginning of the end. Their anticipation of the coming destruction was matched by their eagerness to fulfill their cosmic role as agents of renewal through fire. The cosmic machinery that had maintained order since the world's creation began to show signs of fundamental breakdown as the accumulated stresses of the approaching end times exceeded its design tolerances. The daily journey of the sun across the sky became increasingly erratic as the wolf's skull and Hattie drew closer to their quarry, while the phases of the moon grew irregular as similar supernatural predators pursued their celestial prey. The stars themselves began to flicker and dim as the cosmic fires that sustained them were affected by the growing chaos. Yggdrasil, the world tree that connected all 9 realms, began to show signs of distress as the dragon Nidhogger's gnawing at its roots intensified, and the 4 stags that browsed on its branches consumed ever larger portions of its foliage. The tree's leaves, which had previously provided food for Hydrun and supported the ecosystem of Asgard, began to wither and fall as the tree's vitality was sapped by the increasing damage to its root system. The Norns' daily efforts to preserve the tree through applications of water and clay from the well of Ord proved insufficient against the accelerating rate of destruction. The well of Ord itself began to show signs of contamination as the cosmic chaos affected even this most sacred source of divine law and justice. The water's previously crystal-clear appearance became cloudy and discolored, while its ability to preserve and sanctify began to diminish noticeably. The Norns' weaving of fate became increasingly difficult as the threads they worked with grew brittle and prone to breaking, making it harder to maintain the complex patterns that govern the destinies of gods and mortals alike. Human civilization's final collapse accelerated as the last vestiges of organized society crumbled under the combined pressures of environmental catastrophe and moral decay. The few remaining communities that had managed to survive the worst effects of the Fimbulwinter found themselves unable to maintain even basic cooperation as resources became too scarce to support group survival. The knowledge and skills that had taken generations to develop were lost as their practitioners died, without being able to pass on their expertise to successors who were too focused on immediate survival to learn complex crafts. The stage was now set for the final act of the cosmic drama, as all the forces that had been building throughout the age of the world prepared to converge in the ultimate battle that would determine whether the current order would survive or be swept away to make room for something entirely new. The gods' preparations in Asgard, the giants' mobilization in Jotunheim, and the stirring of monsters and chaotic forces throughout all the worlds created a situation where the slightest additional pressure would trigger the cataclysmic events that would reshape reality itself. The preservation of Norse mythology through the turbulent centuries following Scandinavia's conversion to Christianity represents one of the most remarkable examples of cultural transmission in medieval Europe. The myths that had once formed the living religious beliefs of entire populations survived primarily through the dedicated efforts of Icelandic scholars and storytellers who recognized the irreplaceable value of their ancestral traditions. Iceland's unique position as a society founded by Norwegian emigrants during the Viking Age, combined with its relative isolation from continental European political pressures, created conditions that allowed pagan traditions to persist alongside Christian beliefs far longer than in mainland Scandinavia. The 13th century compilation of the Prose Edda by Snorri Sturluson marked the most systematic attempt to preserve Norse mythological knowledge for future generations. Snorri's work emerged from his recognition that the complex poetic traditions of his ancestors required extensive mythological knowledge that was rapidly disappearing as Christianity displaced the old religion. His systematic organization of divine genealogies, cosmological concepts, and narrative cycles created a comprehensive reference work that would prove invaluable to scholars centuries later. The preservation of the Poetic Edda in manuscripts like the Codex Regius ensured that the actual voices of pre-Christian poets continued to speak across the centuries, maintaining the authentic flavor of mythological thought that might otherwise have been lost to Christian reinterpretation. Medieval Icelandic saga literature provided another crucial vehicle for preserving mythological elements within ostensibly historical narratives. The family sagas, while focusing on the adventures and conflicts of specific lineages, frequently incorporated supernatural elements that reflected underlying mythological beliefs. References to shape-shifting dreams and divine intervention appeared regularly in these texts, demonstrating how mythological thinking continued to influence Icelandic understanding of causation and meaning even after formal conversion to Christianity. The preservation of these narrative traditions in manuscripts created a repository of cultural knowledge that would prove essential for later reconstructions of Norse religious thought. The rediscovery of Norse mythology during the Romantic period of the 18th and 19th centuries coincided with broader European interests in national origins and cultural authenticity that made ancient traditions particularly appealing to scholars and artists seeking alternatives to classical Mediterranean influences. The publication of Paul-Henri Mallet's introduction à l'Histoire de Danemark in 1755 introduced Norse mythology to French intellectual circles, while subsequent translations and scholarly works brought these traditions to the attention of German Romantic writers who were developing theories about the relationship between landscape, language, and cultural character. The Brothers Grimm's work on Germanic folklore and mythology helped establish Norse traditions as part of a broader Germanic cultural heritage that extended far beyond Scandinavia itself. German Romantic fascination with Norse mythology reached its artistic culmination in Richard Wagner's monumental Ring Cycle, a four-opera sequence that transformed ancient Scandinavian myths into a modern dramatic spectacle that captured the imagination of 19th-century audiences. Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen drew heavily on both the prose Edda and the medieval German Nibelungenlied to create a synthesis of Norse and Germanic traditions that emphasized themes of power, corruption, and redemption that resonated with contemporary concerns about industrialization and social change. The composer's innovative use of leitmotifs to represent different characters and concepts created musical associations that have continued to influence how modern audiences understand Norse mythological figures. The Ring Cycle's impact extended far beyond the opera house to influence literature, visual arts, and popular culture throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Wagner's interpretation of Odin as the Wanderer, a figure torn between wisdom and power who ultimately brings about his own destruction, established a template for understanding the All-Father that continues to influence modern depictions. The composer's emphasis on the cyclical nature of cosmic destruction and renewal, combined with his focus on the tragic consequences of seeking power through morally questionable means, created thematic frameworks that would be echoed in countless subsequent works. The influence of Norse mythology on modern literature extends from the foundational works of fantasy literature to contemporary novels that continue to mine these ancient traditions for inspiration. J.R.R. Tolkien's extensive use of Norse mythological elements in The Lord of the Rings and related works demonstrates how these ancient stories could be transformed into modern narratives that retain their essential power while addressing contemporary concerns. Tolkien's dwarves, with their underground halls and masterful craftsmanship, clearly derive from Norse traditions, while his conception of elves as immortal beings caught between the mortal world and otherworldly realms reflects similar tensions found in Norse sources. Neil Gaiman's American Gods and Norse mythology represent more recent attempts to translate these ancient traditions into forms accessible to modern readers, while maintaining respect for their original cultural contexts. Gaiman's work demonstrates how Norse mythological themes of identity transformation and the relationship between old and new continue to resonate with contemporary audiences facing their own cultural transitions. His emphasis on the psychological complexity of mythological figures, particularly Loki's role as both creator and destroyer, reflects modern understanding of personality and motivation, while remaining true to the essential characteristics preserved in medieval sources. The Marvel Comics adaptation of Thor and related Norse mythological figures represents perhaps the most widespread modern exposure to these traditions, introducing Norse gods to global audiences through comic books, films, and television series that have reached hundreds of millions of people worldwide. While these adaptations necessarily simplify and modify the original myths to fit modern entertainment formats, they have succeeded in maintaining public interest in Norse traditions and encouraging further exploration of their sources. The Marvel Thor's characterization as heroic protector, whose strength is tempered by growing wisdom, reflects genuine aspects of the mythological figure while adapting his adventures to contemporary narrative expectations. Archaeological discoveries continue to expand and refine our understanding of Norse religious practices, providing material evidence that complements and sometimes challenges the literary sources that have traditionally formed the basis for mythological interpretation. The excavation of temple sites like Gamla Uppsala in Sweden has revealed evidence of ritual activities that align with descriptions in medieval sources while also providing new information about the practical aspects of Norse religious observance. The discovery of ritual deposits, ceremonial weapons, and religious artifacts at sites across Scandinavia demonstrates the widespread nature of mythological beliefs and their integration into daily life throughout the Viking Age. The Sander figurine from Gotland, depicting a seated figure with a pointed cap who may represent Odin, provides rare visual evidence for how Norse gods were conceived and represented in their original cultural context. Similarly, the numerous Thor's hammer amulets found throughout Scandinavia and Viking settlements abroad demonstrate the practical religious significance of mythological symbols and their use in personal devotion and protection. These archaeological finds help bridge the gap between the literary preservation of myths and their actual function in the lives of the people who believed in them. Recent excavations at sites like Tiso in Denmark have revealed evidence of ritual feasting and weapon sacrifice that corresponds closely to descriptions of religious practices in the literary sources. The discovery of deliberately damaged weapons and jewelry in ritual contexts provides material confirmation of the sacrifice practices described in mythological narratives, while the remains of large-scale feasts suggest the social dimensions of religious observance that extended beyond individual devotion to encompass community celebration and divine communication. The role of Norse mythology in modern Scandinavian cultural identity reflects complex negotiations between historical heritage and contemporary values that continue to evolve as these societies grapple with questions of national character and cultural authenticity. The use of mythological symbols and references in official contexts, from national emblems to public art installations, demonstrates the continued relevance of these ancient traditions, while also raising questions about their appropriate interpretation and application in modern democratic societies. The problematic appropriation of Norse symbols by various political movements throughout history has created ongoing challenges for legitimate scholarly and cultural engagement with these traditions. The Nazi regime's distortion of Norse mythology to support racial theories and militaristic ideology created associations that continue to complicate public understanding of these traditions. The appropriation of symbols like Thor's hammer and runic inscriptions by white supremacist groups has forced scholars and cultural institutions to develop strategies for reclaiming these symbols while educating the public about their authentic historical significance. Modern Scandinavian countries have generally succeeded in maintaining positive relationships with their mythological heritage, while rejecting the political distortions that characterize 20th century appropriations. The celebration of mythological themes and cultural festivals, educational programs, and artistic works demonstrates how these traditions can be honored without endorsing the ideological frameworks that have sometimes been imposed upon them. The emphasis on mythological stories as sources of cultural wisdom rather than political doctrine reflects mature approaches to heritage preservation that acknowledge both the value and the potential dangers of ancient traditions. The academic study of Norse mythology has evolved significantly since the 19th century Romantic period, with modern scholars employing interdisciplinary approaches that combine literary analysis, archaeological evidence, comparative mythology, and anthropological insights to develop more nuanced understandings of these traditions. The recognition that mythological narratives served multiple functions within their original cultural contexts has led to more sophisticated interpretations that avoid the oversimplifications that characterized earlier scholarship. Contemporary research on Norse mythology increasingly emphasizes the diversity of belief and practice that existed within Viking Age Scandinavia, challenging earlier assumptions about unified mythological systems and standardized religious observances. The discovery of regional variations in ritual practices and symbolic representations suggests that Norse religion was more flexible and adaptive than previously understood, with local communities developing their own interpretations of mythological themes while maintaining connections to broader Scandinavian traditions. The digital age has created new opportunities for preserving and sharing Norse mythological traditions through online databases, virtual museum exhibitions, and interactive educational resources that make these materials accessible to global audiences. The digitization of medieval manuscripts has enabled scholars worldwide to access primary sources that were previously available only to specialized researchers, while translation projects have made these texts available in numerous languages. These technological developments have democratized access to Norse mythological materials, while also creating new challenges related to quality control and interpretive accuracy. The influence of Norse mythology on contemporary popular culture extends far beyond literature and film to encompass video games, music, fashion, and lifestyle movements that draw inspiration from Viking Age aesthetics and values. The popularity of historical reenactment groups focused on Viking Age culture demonstrates ongoing public fascination with these traditions, while the growth of modern pagan movements that attempt to reconstruct ancient Norse religious practices reflects deeper spiritual interests in these mythological systems. The educational value of Norse mythology continues to be recognized in academic curricula that use these stories to teach about medieval history, comparative religion, and cultural development. The psychological complexity of mythological narratives provides valuable material for discussions about human nature, moral decision-making, and the relationship between individual agency and cosmic forces. The mythological emphasis on the inevitability of change and the cyclical nature of destruction and renewal offers perspectives on environmental and social challenges that remain relevant to contemporary concerns. The preservation and interpretation of Norse mythology represents an ongoing collaborative effort between scholars, cultural institutions, and the general public that requires careful balance between accessibility and accuracy. The challenge of making these traditions relevant to modern audiences while maintaining respect for their original cultural contexts continues to drive innovation in educational and cultural programming. The success of this effort will determine whether Norse mythology continues to serve as a living source of cultural wisdom or becomes merely an academic curiosity preserved in museums and libraries. The enduring appeal of Norse mythology lies in its unflinching examination of fundamental questions about existence, morality, and meaning that transcend the specific cultural contexts in which these stories originated. The mythological emphasis on courage in the face of inevitable defeat, the complex relationship between order and chaos, and the recognition that even gods must face the consequences of their actions continues to resonate with audiences seeking frameworks for understanding their own challenges and choices. As long as humans grapple with questions of identity, purpose, and mortality, The ancient voices preserved in Norse mythology will continue to offer insights and inspiration that bridge the centuries between the Viking Age and our own time. The legacy of Norse mythology thus extends far beyond its historical significance as the religious system of medieval Scandinavia to encompass its ongoing role as a source of cultural creativity, philosophical reflection, and artistic inspiration. The careful preservation of these traditions by medieval scholars, the rediscovery by romantic writers and artists, and their continued adaptation by contemporary creators demonstrates the remarkable durability of mythological narratives that speak to fundamental aspects of human experience. The future of Norse mythology will depend on the continued efforts of scholars, artists, and cultural institutions to maintain the delicate balance between preservation and innovation that allows ancient wisdom to address modern concerns while retaining its essential character and authenticity.